Hello, this is Eva Spencer, and you are listening to Avoidant Attachment Recovery, a trust and intimacy audiobook provided to you by United Audiobooks. I hope you enjoy my audiobook. Now let us begin.
Introduction. The greatest barrier to connection is the illusion that we have built enough of them. Esther Perel. I never intended to become an expert on avoidant attachment. My journey began in the quiet corners of therapy rooms, listening to brilliant, accomplished individuals describe the same paradox. A deep longing for connection paired with an instinctive urge to flee from it. These weren't people lacking willpower or understanding. They were often the most insightful clients I encountered. They simply couldn't reconcile their intellectual desire for intimacy with the visceral anxiety it produced. There was Michael, a successful entrepreneur who could fearlessly navigate business risks, yet panicked when his partner asked him about his feelings. There was Sophia, a compassionate therapist who helped others heal while keeping her own relationships at arm's length. And there was James, who cycled through relationships the moment they required emotional vulnerability, convinced that something wasn't right each time. What struck me most was their confusion and shame. They wondered why something that seemed effortless for others felt like walking through quicksand for them. Many had listened to relationship audiobooks, attended workshops, even tried therapy, yet nothing seemed to address the specific patterns they experienced. They needed a roadmap designed specifically for the avoidant attachment journey. Beyond simple solutions. The existing literature often left these individuals feeling misunderstood or defective. Mainstream relationship advice typically centers on communication techniques or love languages. Valuable tools, certainly. Mainstream relationship advice typically centers on communication techniques or love languages. Valuable tools, certainly, but ones that don't address the neurobiological alarm systems that activate when avoidantly attached individuals encounter emotional intimacy. I created this audiobook because I believe avoidant attachment is not a character flaw, but an adaptive response, a protection mechanism developed for good reason. Your nervous system learned, perhaps very early in life, that emotional closeness wasn't safe. This wasn't a conscious choice, but a survival strategy your brain implemented to protect you. The science is clear. These patterns are inscribed into our nervous systems through experiences, not decisions. Understanding this can be profoundly liberating. It shifts the conversation from blame to compassion, from judgment to curiosity. This perspective formed the foundation of my approach in this audiobook. A different path forward. This audiobook differs from others in several crucial ways. First, it honors your need for independence and autonomy, while helping you expand your capacity for connection. We'll never suggest you abandon your strengths, your self-sufficiency, your boundaries, your thoughtfulness, but rather build upon them. Second, we integrate cutting-edge neuroscience with practical exercises. You'll understand not just the what of your patterns, but the why and the how of changing them. Your brain created these patterns through experience, and through new experiences, it can create different ones. Third, we move at a pace that respects your nervous system. Many approaches to attachment work inadvertently trigger the very defenses they're trying to address. Our approach is gradual, sustainable, and designed to minimize activation of your threat response system. Your journey begins here. I'm deeply grateful to my clients who courageously shared their stories and tested these approaches, proving that change is possible regardless of age or history. Their transformations inspired and informed every part of this work. I'm also indebted to colleagues in neuroscience, attachment theory, and trauma-informed care, whose research provided the scientific backbone for these methods. This audiobook is for you if you recognize yourself in these patterns, if you felt the push-pull of wanting connection while simultaneously feeling suffocated by it. It's for those who've been called emotionally unavailable, or wondered why intimacy feels more threatening than comforting. It's also for those in relationships with avoidantly attached individuals, seeking to understand rather than judge. No special knowledge is required to begin this journey, just a willingness to approach yourself with curiosity instead of criticism. Throughout this audiobook, I invite you to practice the same compassion toward yourself that you likely extend to others. The path we are about to walk isn't always comfortable, but it leads to a life where connection and autonomy peacefully coexist, rather than battle for supremacy. A life where intimacy feels like coming home, rather than losing yourself. Thank you for trusting me to accompany you on this journey. The courage it takes to examine these patterns is significant, and that courage speaks volumes about your capacity for growth. Keep listening when you're ready, and we'll begin unraveling these patterns together, one gentle step at a time. Let love in without losing yourself. For years, I mistook emotional distance for strength. I told myself I was self-sufficient, that needing others made me weak. But the truth was simpler and far more human. I was afraid that closeness meant losing control, afraid that vulnerability would lead to rejection, afraid that love could not last if I was truly seen. Healing avoidant attachment begins not with forcing connection, but with understanding the fears that built your walls in the first place. When you start meeting those fears with compassion instead of shame, the walls begin to soften. You learn that safety isn't found in isolation, but in trust. Trust in yourself, and trust in the love that can hold you without consuming you. To help you uncover what lives beneath those protective layers, I partnered with Books for Growth to bring you the free What is Your Psychological Archetype quiz. This guided reflection reveals the emotional architecture of your attachments, showing you how to transform guided independence into grounded openness, and how to meet love without losing yourself. You are capable of both strength and softness. Begin opening to the kind of connection that heals, rather than hurts, by taking the quiz. Visit quiz.booksforgrowth.com to get started. That's quiz.books4growth.com. Again, quiz.booksforgrowth.com. Chapter 1. Unlocking the Solitude Safeguard. When silence speaks louder than words, the hidden language of avoidance. In the quiet spaces between conversations, in the subtle shift away from a partner's touch, or in the skillful deflection of personal questions, lies a story rarely understood. What many perceive as aloofness or disinterest often masks a profound internal struggle, one where the desire for connection battles constantly with the fear of being hurt. This is the reality for those with avoidant attachment styles, whose apparent preference for solitude is not a choice but a shield. The misconception that people with avoidant attachment simply prefer to be alone has persisted for too long. Throughout this chapter, we'll unravel the truth behind what appears to be emotional distance, but is actually a sophisticated defense mechanism. Avoidant attachment isn't about rejecting intimacy. It's about protecting oneself from the perceived dangers of vulnerability. This critical distinction changes everything about how we approach healing and growth for those who struggle with this pattern. For many listeners, this journey begins with recognition. Perhaps you've noticed your tendency to withdraw when relationships deepen. Or maybe you love someone who seems to erect invisible barriers whenever emotional intimacy increases. These patterns aren't random or intentionally hurtful. They're survival strategies developed long ago, often in childhood, when dependency on others felt threatening rather than nurturing. Understanding this fundamental truth is the first step toward transformation. In this first chapter, we'll explore 3 essential insights that lay the groundwork for recovery. First, we'll examine how avoidant attachment serves as protection rather than preference, illuminating why solitude often feels safer than connection. Next, we'll dispel common myths about avoidant individuals that have prevented true understanding and compassion. Finally, we'll shine light on the deep-seated fears driving these behaviors, creating space for self-awareness and compassion where judgment once resided. This foundational understanding sets the stage for the deeper work that follows in subsequent chapters. As we progress through this audiobook, you'll discover the neurobiological underpinnings of attachment patterns, learn practical exercises to gradually dismantle emotional walls, and develop skills to cultivate safety within relationships. The journey ahead includes exploring how childhood experiences shape adult attachment, techniques for managing anxiety during moments of vulnerability, and methods for communicating needs effectively without retreating into isolation. What distinguishes this approach from others is its emphasis on transformation rather than mere adaptation. The goal isn't to simply cope with avoidant tendencies or to ask others to accommodate them indefinitely. Instead, we aim to gradually rewire the nervous system's response to intimacy, creating new pathways where closeness feels safe rather than threatening. This neuroplastic potential, our brain's ability to form new connections through repeated experience, offers profound hope for lasting change, even for those who have struggled with these patterns for decades. As we begin this exploration together, I invite you to approach this work with gentleness toward yourself or the person you're seeking to understand. The defenses we'll discuss weren't chosen consciously. They developed as necessary protection during formative years, when other options weren't available. Now, with greater resources and awareness, you have the opportunity to choose differently. The journey towards secure attachment isn't about abandoning self-protection entirely, but about developing more flexible, conscious ways of navigating connection that allow for both safety and intimacy to coexist. The path ahead isn't always straightforward. There will be moments of progress, followed by familiar retreats into old patterns. This rhythm of growth is natural and expected. What matters is your willingness to notice these patterns with curiosity, rather than judgment, to practice new responses, even when they feel unfamiliar, and to trust that each small step builds toward meaningful change. By the end of our time together, you'll have not only a deeper understanding of avoidant attachment, but practical tools to transform fear into trust, distance into presence, and isolation into connection, all while honoring your fundamental need for autonomy and self-definition. The fear behind the distance. Sarah gazed out the window as rain streaked down the glass, each droplet racing others to the bottom edge. She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapped in the heavy blue blanket that once belonged to her grandmother. The apartment stood quiet except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the steady rhythm of water hitting the window pane. "I don't understand why you won't just tell me what you're feeling," Michael had said before leaving this morning, his voice breaking with frustration. Those words now floated in her mind, unwelcome visitors that refused to leave. She knew why she couldn't tell him. The words formed inside her, fully shaped thoughts with sharp edges that cut when she tried to bring them to her tongue. The phone buzzed on the table. Michael again. She watched it vibrate against the wood, inching toward the edge with each buzz. She did not reach for it. The space between them had grown over the past weeks, a distance she created with practiced precision. It wasn't that she didn't care for him. The thought of losing him twisted her stomach into knots. But something deeper, something primal pulled her away from the vulnerability his love demanded. Sarah remembered her therapist's words from Tuesday's session. This pattern, Dr. Wells had said, tapping her pen against her yellow legal pad, it protects you from hurt, but it also prevents connection. The rain fell harder now, the drops merging into sheets against the glass. Sarah pressed her forehead to the cool window. Her breath fogged a small circle that expanded and contracted with each exhale. Michael's text would wait, as would the phone call from her mother and the dinner invitation from her colleague. The world pressed in with its demands for connection, but she had built her walls high and strong over years of careful construction. In the kitchen, she filled a glass with water, watching the clear liquid rise. Her reflection wavered in the tap's chrome finish, distorting her features until she hardly recognized herself. The apartment walls held photographs of people she loved: her sister's wedding, her parents' anniversary, Michael laughing at the beach last summer, all kept at a safe distance behind glass and frames. She cared for these people. She loved them. Yet when they reached for the deepest parts of her, She retreated like a turtle into its shell. Night fell outside her window. The rain continued its steady assault, and the streetlights cast long yellow fingers across her living room floor. Sarah picked up her phone and read Michael's message. "I'm not giving up on us." Such simple words, such terrifying words. She set the phone down without responding. Tomorrow she would try again. Tomorrow she might find the courage to explain that her distance wasn't about him, but about the fear that lived inside her. The one that whispered that being seen completely meant risking complete devastation. How different might her relationships look if others could see that her silence wasn't rejection, but protection, that her avoidance wasn't disinterest, but fear. The shield behind solitude. Avoidant attachment styles are often misinterpreted as a simple preference for independence or solitude. However, what appears as aloofness or disinterest actually masks a complex psychological defense mechanism. People with avoidant attachment aren't running from connection because they don't value it. They're protecting themselves from the perceived dangers of emotional closeness. This protective strategy develops early in life, often in response to caregivers who were emotionally unavailable, inconsistent, or rejecting. The child learns that depending on others leads to disappointment, and independence becomes the safest option. Think of avoidant attachment as wearing an invisible suit of armor. From the outside, others see someone seemingly comfortable in their isolation, perhaps even preferring it. But from within, the person is simply taking precautions against emotional injury. The armor provides protection, yes, but it also prevents the wearer from feeling the warmth of genuine connection. Over time, they may forget they're wearing armor at all. The defense posture becomes their usual way of being in the world. Research consistently shows that avoidant individuals experience the same basic human need for connection as everyone else. Studies measuring physiological responses reveal that when faced with relationship challenges, avoidant individuals experience significant internal stress responses, despite appearing calm on the surface. Their nervous systems react strongly to relationship threats, even as their external behavior suggests indifference. This contradiction between internal experience and external presentation is key to understanding avoidant attachment. The desire for connection exists alongside a powerful fear of its dangers. What's particularly challenging for those with avoidant attachment is that their defense strategies often work in the short term. Emotional distance does prevent immediate hurt. Maintaining independence does protect against disappointment. Self-reliance does ensure they'll never be abandoned. These immediate benefits reinforce the pattern, even as the long-term costs accumulate in the form of relationship difficulties, emotional isolation, and a persistent sense that something important is missing from life. The effectiveness of these defenses makes them especially difficult to recognize and address. Avoidant attachment is not a preference for solitude, but a sophisticated defense mechanism designed to protect against the perceived dangers of emotional vulnerability and dependency. Beyond the misconceptions. One of the most persistent misconceptions about avoidantly attached individuals is that they are cold, unfeeling, or incapable of love. In reality, research indicates they simply process and express emotions differently. Their emotional lives may be just as rich as anyone else's, but their expression is muted by defensive strategies that develop to protect them from pain. What appears as emotional flatness often masks a complex internal world, where feelings are experienced but carefully contained and controlled. Many people mistakenly believe that those with avoidant attachment simply don't care about relationships. This fundamental misunderstanding leads to painful interactions, where partners, friends, and family members feel rejected or unimportant. The truth is far more nuanced. Avoidant individuals often care deeply, but are simultaneously terrified of the vulnerability that comes with showing how much they care. Their apparent indifference is actually a defense against the risk of rejection or disappointment. Picture a person standing at the edge of a swimming pool on a hot day. Everyone around them is diving in, enjoying the refreshing water. They want to join in, The heat is uncomfortable and the water looks inviting. Yet something holds them back. Perhaps they had a frightening experience with water in childhood, or never learned to swim properly. To others, it might seem they're simply uninterested in swimming. In truth, they long for the relief and connection the water offers, but fear keeps them rooted to the safety of solid ground. Another common misconception is that avoidant individuals don't need emotional support from others. In professional settings, they're often valued for their independence and self-sufficiency. Colleagues might think, she never asks for help, she's so capable. However, this perceived strength masks a significant limitation: the inability to reach out when support is genuinely needed. The avoidant person hasn't transcended the human need for connection. They've simply learned to deny or suppress it, often at great personal cost. The misconception that avoidant attachment is fixed and unchangeable can be particularly damaging. Many people, including those with avoidant tendencies themselves, believe these patterns are simply who they are, rather than adaptive strategies that can evolve and change. This fatalistic view prevents many from seeking the growth and healing that is absolutely possible. Attachment patterns show remarkable plasticity throughout life, especially when approached with self-awareness and appropriate support. Perhaps the most harmful misconception is that avoidant individuals are deliberately withholding or playing games in relationships. Their partners often feel manipulated when the avoidant person pulls away after moments of closeness. However, this retreat isn't calculated. It's an automatic response to the anxiety that intimacy triggers. The pull away happens when the emotional closeness exceeds what feels safe, activating deeply ingrained protective responses. Understanding this pattern as an unconscious defense, rather than a deliberate strategy, is crucial for both the avoidant person and those who care about them. What might change in your relationships if you begin seeing avoidant behaviors not as rejection, but as an instinctive protection against feelings of vulnerability that feel overwhelming and dangerous? The fear behind the distance. At the core of avoidant attachment lies a fundamental fear of dependency. This fear isn't irrational. It's based on early experiences that taught the individual that depending on others is risky. When a child's emotional or physical needs are consistently unmet, ignored, or punished, they learn a powerful lesson. Self-reliance is the only reliable strategy. As adults, this translates into difficulty trusting others with their emotional well-being, creating a persistent tension between the human need for connection and the learned fear of its dangers. The fear of vulnerability represents another significant underlying driver of avoidant behaviors. For many with this attachment style, emotional openness feels like handing someone else the power to hurt them. Their experiences have taught them that vulnerability leads to pain, rejection, or manipulation. This creates a double bind. They desire the closeness that can only come through vulnerability, yet fear the very openness that would make such connection possible. This internal conflict often manifests as a pattern of approach and retreat in relationships that confuses both the avoidant person and those who care about them. Consider how a turtle responds to a potential threat. It retreats into its protective shell. This withdrawal isn't a rejection of the outside world, but a survival mechanism triggered by perceived danger. Similarly, when avoidant individuals sense emotional danger, perhaps a partner expressing needs or expectations, or moments of deepening intimacy, they withdraw into their metaphorical shell. The retreat provides immediate safety, but prevents them from experiencing the potential benefits that might lie beyond their fear. Unlike the turtle, whose shell is an innate protection, the avoidant person's defenses were learned and can therefore be unlearned with time and conscious effort. Another significant fear driving avoidant behavior is the loss of autonomy and identity. Many avoidantly attached individuals equate emotional closeness with being engulfed or controlled. They fear that genuine intimacy requires surrendering their independence, boundaries, and sense of self. This fear often stems from childhood experiences where their individuality wasn't respected, or where love came with conditions that required suppressing authentic aspects of themselves. The resulting defense strategy prioritizes independence above all else, sometimes to the point where even healthy interdependence feels threatening. The fear of disappointment acts as a powerful motivator for emotional distance. Many avoidant individuals have experienced the pain of having their hopes raised only to be let down, often repeatedly in childhood. As a result, they develop a strategy of lowered expectations and emotional detachment. If they don't hope for much, they can't be disappointed. This protective mechanism minimizes short-term pain, but creates long-term limitations in their capacity for joy, connection, and fulfillment. The avoidant person often doesn't recognize how this fear constrains their life, seeing their limited emotional engagement as simply being realistic rather than defensive. The behaviors associated with avoidant attachment, emotional distance, self-reliance, and discomfort with intimacy aren't character flaws or preferences, but adaptive responses to genuine fears. Understanding these fears as the protective mechanisms they are, rather than dismissing them as coldness or disinterest, creates the foundation for both self-compassion and change. Only by recognizing that avoidant patterns serve to shield against vulnerability, dependency, and potential hurt, can we begin the work of creating new patterns that allow for both safety and connection. The path forward: recognition and compassion. Understanding avoidant attachment as a protective response, rather than a character flaw, transforms how we perceive both ourselves and others. This perspective shift is the first crucial step toward healing. When we recognize that distancing behaviors stem from fear rather than disinterest, blame gives way to compassion. The person who seems aloof isn't rejecting connection. They're protecting themselves in the only way they know how. For those with avoidant tendencies, this understanding opens the door to self-awareness without shame. You aren't broken or defective. You developed perfectly reasonable adaptations to your early environment. Your brain and nervous system created effective strategies to manage painful experiences. These strategies protected you when you needed protection. Acknowledging this truth doesn't mean resigning yourself to limitation. Instead, it establishes the foundation of self-compassion necessary for growth. The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change, wrote physiologist Carl Rogers. This insight is particularly relevant for healing avoidant attachment patterns. The path forward isn't forced vulnerability or pretending to be someone you're not. It begins with gentle recognition of your patterns, the fears that drive them, and the experiences that shape them. This acceptance doesn't mean approval of limitations. It means understanding them compassionately before attempting to move beyond them. The journey from avoidant attachment toward greater security isn't about eliminating all defenses. Healthy boundaries and appropriate self-protection remain important for everyone. Instead, it's about developing flexibility, the ability to move toward connection when it's safe and beneficial, while maintaining boundaries when necessary. This balanced approach replaces rigid defensive patterns with responsive choices, based on present reality rather than past hurts. The misconceptions about avoidant attachment keep us trapped in patterns of misunderstanding and judgment. While recognizing that protective function of avoidant behaviors creates space for compassion. Understanding the fears that drive these behaviors, vulnerability, dependency, disappointment, and loss of autonomy, helps us see avoidance not as rejection, but as self-protection. This threefold understanding forms the foundation for growth, recognizing that what appears as disinterest is actually defense, that common perceptions of avoidant individuals are often mistaken, and that addressing the underlying fears is the path toward greater connection and fulfillment. Stepping stones to awareness. Recognizing avoidant patterns in yourself requires patience and honesty. Begin by noticing your responses to emotional closeness. Do you feel uncomfortable when relationships deepen? Do you find reasons to create distance after moments of intimacy? These reactions aren't flaws. They're important clues about your attachment style. Notice them without judgment as you would observe weather patterns or traffic patterns, with curiosity rather than criticism. The physical sensations that accompany emotional closeness provide another window into avoidant patterns. Many people with avoidant attachment report feeling trapped, suffocated, or physically uncomfortable during intimate moments. Your body may tense, your breathing might become shallow, or you might feel an urge to move away. These physical responses aren't imaginary. They're real manifestations of your nervous system's learned protection strategies. By noticing these sensations with awareness, you can begin to distinguish between genuine danger and learned fear responses. Journaling offers a powerful tool for identifying avoidant patterns. Try this simple exercise. For 1 week, write briefly about moments when you felt the urge to pull away from someone. Note what happened just before that urge arose. Was vulnerability required? Did the other person express needs or expectations? Were you beginning to feel dependent on them in some way? Patterns will likely emerge, showing you precisely what triggers your protective responses. This awareness is the necessary first step toward choice rather than automatic reaction. Feedback from trusted others can provide invaluable insights that may be difficult to see on your own. Consider asking a close friend or partner what they notice about your patterns and relationships. How do you respond when they need support? What happens when the relationship deepens? Their observations, while potentially uncomfortable to hear, offer a perspective that complements your self-reflection. Remember that the goal isn't self-criticism, but greater self-awareness, the prerequisite for any meaningful change. Throughout this chapter, we've explored how avoidant attachment operates not as a genuine preference for isolation, but as a sophisticated defense system developed early in life. By recognizing that what appears as aloofness or disinterest actually masks a profound fear of vulnerability, we can begin to transform our understanding of ourselves and others. The protective mechanisms we've identified aren't character flaws or permanent traits, but adaptive responses that once served an important purpose. When we acknowledge the underlying fears driving these behaviors, whether fear of rejection, abandonment, or emotional overwhelm, we create space for compassion rather than self-criticism. Perhaps, most importantly, we've dispelled common misconceptions about avoidant attachment. These misunderstandings often leave individuals feeling mischaracterized and misunderstood, further reinforcing withdrawal patterns. By cultivating a more accurate and empathetic perspective, we lay the groundwork for healing connections, beginning with the relationship we have with ourselves. The attachment excavation process. This 6-step reflection exercise helps you uncover the protective nature of your attachment patterns, transforming self-judgment into understanding. Step 1. Create a reflection space, 15 to 20 minutes. Find a quiet, comfortable environment where you won't be interrupted. Bring a journal, turn off notifications, and perhaps light a candle or prepare tea to signal to yourself that this is protected time for your inner exploration. Step 2. Map your relationship landscape, 20 to 30 minutes. List significant relationships throughout your life, romantic partners, close friends, and family members. For each, note patterns that emerged. Did you feel uncomfortable when they needed emotional support? Did you create distance after moments of closeness? Notice themes without judgment. Step 3. Identify withdrawal triggers, 15 to 20 minutes. Recall specific moments when you felt the need to pull away. What happened just before? What bodily sensations accompanied the urge to withdraw? Document these instances with curiosity rather than criticism. Step 4. Name your underlying fears, 20 to 25 minutes. For each withdrawal pattern, ask yourself, what was I afraid might happen if I stayed present? Common fears include rejection, criticism, loss of independence, or feeling overwhelmed by others' needs. Write these fears down, acknowledging their validity when they first developed. Step 5. Connect fears to misunderstandings, 15 to 20 minutes. Reflect on how these protective responses may have been misinterpreted by others. Perhaps a partner saw your need for space as lack of love, or friends interpreted your self-reliance as disinterest in their support. Note how these misunderstandings may have reinforced your protective patterns. Step 6. Reframe your story, 15 to 20 minutes. Write a brief narrative that reinterprets your attachment style not as a preference for solitude, but as a protection against emotional risk. Include compassionate language acknowledging how these patterns helped you survive difficult circumstances, while recognizing they may no longer serve your current needs and desires for connection. This process isn't about immediately changing behaviors, but about developing self-awareness that makes change possible. By understanding the protective nature of avoidant patterns, you're already taking a significant step toward healing. As we move forward in this journey, remember that recognizing these patterns doesn't mean you're broken or damaged. Quite the opposite. Your attachment style developed for good reason, and the very fact that you're exploring it now demonstrates tremendous courage and a readiness for growth. In the chapters ahead, we'll build on this foundation of understanding by exploring practical strategies for gradually expanding your comfort with vulnerability, developing skills for navigating emotional intimacy, and creating relationships where connection feels safe rather than threatening. The path towards secure attachment isn't about forcing yourself into uncomfortable situations. It's about gently expanding your capacity for meaningful connection while honoring your need for autonomy. Your journey of transformation has already begun. By seeing your attachment patterns through a lens of compassion rather than criticism, you've taken the first crucial step toward the fulfilling relationships you deserve. Trust that with patience, practice, and self-compassion, you can develop new patterns of connection that honor both your need for independence and your capacity for intimacy. Deepen emotional awareness and reconnect with what feels safe. If you've recognized yourself in the concepts of this chapter, the quiet retreat when conversations grow intimate, the urge to protect your independence, even when you long for closeness, you're not alone. These patterns are not evidence of emotional deficiency. They are signs of a nervous system that learned, long ago, to protect itself. I understand how exhausting it can feel to want connection yet fear what it demands. I spent years believing that needing space made me distant or unloving. What I eventually discovered was that distance wasn't my flaw. It was my armor. And like any armor, it once kept me safe. But eventually it began to keep me isolated. Learning to understand my emotions rather than silence them was the key that allowed real safety to return. Safety that could exist even within closeness. To help you continue this process, I've collaborated with Books for Growth to create a practical guide titled Emotional Intelligence in Social Settings. Together, we designed it to help you explore your emotional responses with greater understanding and patience, offering practical ways to recognize what your feelings are trying to tell you before they turn into withdrawal or shutdown. You'll find simple, insightful reflections that guide you toward interpreting emotions not as threats, but as information. Helpful signals that can strengthen both trust and authenticity. It's a meaningful next step in transforming emotional distance into calm, connected awareness. Download your free copy by visiting emotions.booksforgrowth.com. That's emotions.books4growth.com. Again, emotions.booksforgrowth.com.
I hope you are enjoying my audiobook so far. It would be a pleasure if you could let me know how you are feeling about this audiobook in the comments section below. We would greatly appreciate it if you could also like this video and subscribe to United Audiobooks to have access to more best-selling audiobooks in the future. Also, if you are interested in getting more free audiobooks, please click the first link in the description below. Now let us carry on with the next chapter.
Chapter 2. Embracing Independence Within Intimacy. The false dichotomy that's holding you back. Independence doesn't have to come at the expense of closeness. For too long, we've been fed the narrative that to love deeply means sacrificing our sense of self. That intimacy requires us to surrender our autonomy on the altar of connection. This couldn't be further from the truth. The reality is that healthy relationships thrive on the interdependence of two whole individuals who maintain their separate identities while creating something meaningful together. If you identify with avoidant attachment patterns, you've likely felt the tension between your desire for connection and your equally powerful need for independence. Perhaps you've withdrawn when relationships became too close, fearing that emotional intimacy would somehow swallow you whole. You're not alone in this struggle. Many people with avoidant tendencies navigate this same tightrope, convinced they must choose between preserving their autonomy and experiencing genuine closeness with others. What if this supposed choice is actually a false dichotomy? The core promise we'll explore is that independence and intimacy aren't opposing forces, but complementary strengths that, when appropriately balanced, create relationships that are both deeply connected and profoundly respectful of individual boundaries. This understanding is crucial for those with avoidant attachment styles, because it addresses your fundamental concern that opening yourself to others means losing yourself in the process. The journey towards secure attachment doesn't require you to abandon your independence. Quite the opposite. Learning to maintain your sense of self while allowing others closer is the very definition of secure functioning. Throughout this chapter, we'll dismantle the myths that have perpetuated this false choice between independence and intimacy. We'll examine how these beliefs may have shaped your approach to relationships, keeping others at arm's length out of self-protection. We'll also explore practical strategies for maintaining your personal autonomy while simultaneously building deeper connections. These aren't theoretical concepts, but actionable techniques you can implement immediately. From setting healthy boundaries to communicating your needs effectively, you'll learn how to preserve your independence without sacrificing the possibility of meaningful intimacy. The goal isn't to make you dependent on others, but to help you develop the flexibility to move comfortably between independence and interdependence as circumstances warrant. Perhaps most importantly, we'll investigate how this balance between independence and intimacy creates the optimal conditions for personal growth. When you no longer feel compelled to choose between autonomy and connection, entirely new possibilities emerge. Your relationships become sources of strength rather than threats to your independence. You discover that the right kind of intimacy doesn't diminish you, it expands you, creating space for greater self-discovery and authentic expression. This chapter marks an essential step in your recovery from avoidant attachment patterns by understanding that independence and intimacy can coexist harmoniously. You begin to dismantle one of the fundamental barriers to secure attachment. The fear that has kept you emotionally distant, the fear of losing yourself in relationships, loses its power when you recognize it's based on a false premise. You can remain distinctly you while still allowing others to truly know and connect with you. This realization doesn't just transform how you approach relationships, it transforms how you understand yourself. The embrace without surrender. Thomas stood by the window of his apartment, coffee cup in hand. Morning light cut through the blinds, casting lines across his face. Below, the city stirred, cars moving like blood cells through concrete arteries, people walking with purpose or without it. His phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Anna again. Third time this morning. He took a sip of coffee, bitter and black. The liquid warmed his throat but did nothing for the cold that had settled in his chest since their argument last night. She wanted more time, more words, more of him given away. And with each piece he surrendered, Thomas felt something essential slipping through his fingers. "You built walls," she had said. Her voice steadied despite the tears in her eyes. "You say you want this relationship, but you keep parts of yourself locked away where I can't reach them." The accusation had stung before it carried truth. He did build walls. Walls kept him safe. Walls kept him whole. His fingers hovered over the phone. He could call her back, try to explain again that needing space didn't mean he didn't care, that sometimes being alone was how he found himself, not how he lost her. But words had failed him before. They tangled in his throat, emerged wrong. He set the cup down, watching a thin crack in its side where coffee seeped through. Slow, persistent, like Anna's patience wearing down. The bookshelf across the room caught his eye, third shelf between worn copies of Hemingway and Steinbeck. Sat the book his therapist had recommended. Attachment in Adults. Its spine read in simple block letters. Thomas had read half of it, enough to recognize himself in the descriptions of avoidant attachment, enough to know that his need for distance came from somewhere real, not just stubbornness or fear. He crossed the room and pulled the book down. The pages fell open to a passage he'd underlined weeks ago. Independence and intimacy exist not in opposition, but in harmony. The self does not dissolve in connection. It grows. He ran his finger along the words. They seemed genuine and impossible at once. Outside, a construction worker's hammer pounded rhythm into the morning. Each strike echoed the beating in Thomas's chest. He thought of Anna's hand in his at the concert last weekend. How, for once, he hadn't felt the urge to pull away. How sometimes, in rare moments, closeness felt like freedom rather than confinement. The phone buzzed again. This time, Thomas picked it up. "I need to see you," the message read. Simple words that asked complicated things. He looked out the window again, at people moving together and apart on the sidewalks below, each in their own world, yet connected. Maybe that was the secret. Not walls torn down, but doors carefully opened. Not independence surrendered, but shared on one's own terms. He typed back, Central Park, noon, the spot by the pond. Then he set the phone down and returned to the window, watching the light change as clouds passed overhead. The hammer continued its steady work in the distance, breaking and building all at once. Thomas wondered if relationships worked the same way. If something had to be broken open before something stronger could be built in its place. Could a person remain whole while opening themselves to another? Could the spaces between two people be bridges rather than chasms? Beyond either or, the myth of relationship extremes. Many of us grew up believing in a false dichotomy about relationships. We were told, explicitly or implicitly, that we must choose between independence and intimacy. This myth suggests that to be in a close relationship means sacrificing our autonomy, or that maintaining our independence requires emotional distance from others. This black and white thinking creates unnecessary anxiety for those with avoidant attachment patterns, who already fear being engulfed by relationships. Think of a well-designed suspension bridge. Each capable and support beam has its own distinct role and position, yet they work together to create something strong and functional. The cables don't lose their identity by connecting to other parts. Rather, their connections are precisely what allowed the bridge to serve its purpose. Similarly, in healthy relationships, our connections to others don't diminish who we are. They enhance our ability to move through life with greater resilience and joy. Research consistently shows that the healthiest relationships are those where both partners maintain their sense of self while also creating space for genuine connection. A 2018 study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that couples who supported each other's personal growth and independence reported higher relationship satisfaction and longevity. This contradicts the notion that closeness requires fusion or the surrender of personal boundaries. For those with avoidant attachment patterns, this false dichotomy can feel particularly threatening. The fear often goes like this: if I let someone get close, they'll consume me. This fear isn't irrational. It usually stems from early experiences where boundaries weren't respected, or where emotional closeness felt unsafe or inconsistent. But this fear leads to protective behaviors that ultimately create the very disconnection they're trying to avoid. Another prevalent myth is that emotional vulnerability equals weakness. Many avoidant individuals pride themselves on self-reliance, viewing emotional needs as signs of inadequacy. However, neuroscience tells us that humans are biologically wired for connection. Our brains literally develop and function optimally in the context of secure relationships. The ability to be vulnerable, to share our authentic selves with others, actually requires tremendous strength and courage. Consider how a tree grows. Its roots extend deep and wide beneath the soil, providing stability and nourishment. Above ground, its branches reach toward the sky, growing in their own unique patterns. The tree doesn't have to choose between being rooted and reaching outward. Both are essential parts of its nature. In the same way, we can be deeply connected to others while continuing to grow as individuals. The fear of losing oneself in relationships often stems from experiences with poorly defined boundaries. When we haven't learned to say no or express our needs clearly, relationships can indeed feel threatening to our sense of self. But this isn't a problem with intimacy itself. It's a problem with how we approach intimacy. Learning to maintain healthy boundaries actually enables a deeper connection, because we can engage authentically rather than from a defensive posture. Independence and intimacy are not opposing forces in a zero-sum game, but complementary elements that, when balanced, create the foundation for the most fulfilling human connections. Strategies for autonomy within connection. Maintaining personal autonomy while building emotional connections requires intentional practice. It starts with self-awareness, understanding your own needs, preferences, and boundaries. For those with avoidant attachment patterns, this means distinguishing between genuine needs for space and reflexive distancing behaviors that stem from anxiety. Try keeping a journal to track your emotional responses in relationships. When do you feel the urge to pull away? Is it when you're genuinely overwhelmed, or is it a habitual response to increasing closeness? This practice resembles learning to drive a manual transmission car. At first, you must consciously think about each action, pressing the clutch, shifting gears, and releasing slowly. It feels awkward and requires full attention. Eventually, though, these movements become natural, and you can navigate changing conditions smoothly. Similarly, with practice, balancing autonomy and connection becomes less effortful and more intuitive. Clear communication serves as the bridge between independence and intimacy. Many people fear that expressing needs for personal space will hurt their partner, so they either suppress these needs, leading to resentment, or withdraw without explanation, causing confusion and pain. Instead, try phrases like, "I need some time to recharge on my own, but I'm looking forward to connecting with you afterward." This approach honors both your need for autonomy and the relationship itself. What often surprises those with avoidant tendencies is that healthy partners usually respect clearly communicated boundaries. In fact, respecting each other's autonomy can build trust rather than threaten the relationship. When your partner sees that you return from periods of independence, still committed to the connection, it creates a positive cycle where independence and intimacy reinforce rather than undermine each other. Creating structured alone time can help avoidant individuals feel secure enough to engage in a closer connection. This might mean having designated evenings for personal pursuits, separate vacations occasionally, or even just daily solitude rituals. The key is consistency. Knowing that your independence is protected makes it easier to be present during times of togetherness. Some couples find that having separate bedrooms works well, while others prefer sharing sleeping space but maintain personal areas elsewhere in the home. Dr. Esther Perel, renowned relationship therapist, explains this paradox eloquently. The quality of our relationships depends on the quality of our solitudes. Taking time to cultivate your individual interests, friendships, and internal world actually gives you more to bring to your intimate relationships. This isn't selfish. It's a sustainable relationship practice that benefits both parties. For those healing from avoidant attachment patterns, gradually increasing emotional vulnerability can build confidence in maintaining autonomy while connecting. Start with small disclosures about your inner experience. Perhaps sharing a minor concern or joy before moving to more profound revelations. Notice that sharing these parts of yourself doesn't result in being controlled or engulfed. Each positive experience creates evidence that contradicts the core fear that intimacy equals loss of self. Another practical strategy involves mindful togetherness, being fully present during quality time with your partner while also honoring your authentic experience in the moment. This might mean acknowledging when you're feeling overwhelmed and need a short break. Rather than pushing through discomfort until you reach a breaking point, true intimacy includes the full range of human experience, not just the comfortable parts. Remember that healthy relationships involve interdependence, not codependence or complete independence. Interdependence means two whole people choosing to build something together, supporting each other while maintaining their distinct identities. This balance allows for mutual growth and support without either person sacrificing their essential self. It's okay, even beneficial, to need and be needed, as long as those needs don't become demands or obligations. What if the path to your most authentic self includes both meaningful connection and personal freedom, not as competing priorities, but as complementary forces that bring out the best in each other? The Independent Intimacy Balance Framework. Balancing independence with intimacy doesn't happen by accident. It requires intention, awareness, and practical tools. The framework below offers a systemic approach to cultivating this balance in your relationships. Core Values and Individual Needs Assessment. At the foundation of the Independent Intimacy Balance Framework lies a thorough understanding of your personal values and needs. This isn't about what you think you should value, but what truly matters to you at a fundamental level. For someone with avoidant attachment tendencies, common core values might include freedom, self-reliance, competence, and personal achievement. Take time to identify which needs are non-negotiable for your well-being. Perhaps you require substantial solitude to process your thoughts. Or maybe you need intellectual stimulation through independent pursuits. These aren't character flaws. They're legitimate aspects of your unique constitution. When you clearly understand these needs, you can communicate them effectively rather than defensively withdrawing when they're not met. The values assessment serves as your personal compass when navigating relationship decisions. Without this clarity, you might find yourself agreeing to arrangements that subtly violate your core needs, leading to resentment and increased avoidant behaviors. With clarity, you can make conscious choices about which compromises feel workable and which boundaries need firm protection. Emotional trigger recognition. The second component involves identifying specific situations that activate your attachment system and trigger the urge to distance yourself. These triggers often connect to early experiences where vulnerability led to disappointment or harm. Common triggers for avoidant individuals include feeling pressured for emotional disclosure, sensing expectations for constant togetherness, or detecting signs of emotional neediness in others. Physical sensations often accompany these emotional triggers: tension in your shoulders, a knot in your stomach, or an overwhelming desire to create physical distance. By recognizing these bodily cues early, you gain precious moments to respond thoughtfully rather than react automatically. This awareness creates space between stimulus and response, space where you can choose connection despite discomfort. Documenting your triggers and associated sensations helps demystify your patterns. What might otherwise feel like an inexplicable need to withdraw becomes understandable. For example, you might notice that you consistently feel smothered after multiple consecutive days without alone time, or that certain tones of voice remind you of controlling figures from your past. This knowledge empowers you to address the real issues rather than avoiding connection altogether. Transparent communication practices. Communication forms the vital link between your internal world and your relationships. The framework's third element focuses on developing skills to express needs and boundaries clearly, while remaining open to emotional connection. This represents a significant challenge for avoidant individuals who often struggle with directly stating needs or discussing emotional topics. Effective communication in this context requires specificity rather than generalized statements. Instead of saying, "I need space," which can sound like rejection, try, "I've noticed I feel overwhelmed after social events and need about 2 hours of quiet time to decompress before I can be fully present again." This approach acknowledges both your need and your continued commitment to the relationship. Equally important is developing comfort with meta-communication. Talking about how you communicate, this might involve acknowledging your tendency to withdraw when stressed, or explaining that your need for independence doesn't reflect dissatisfaction with the relationship. Such conversations create shared understanding that prevents partners from misinterpreting your attachment behaviors as lack of interest or care. Boundary establishment and maintenance. Boundaries represent the fourth component of the framework. For those with avoidant tendencies, boundaries often become rigid barriers that keep others at a safe emotional distance. The challenge involves transforming these inflexible walls into permeable boundaries that protect your autonomy while allowing connection. Healthy boundaries require ongoing assessment and adjustment. Some days you might need more space than others, depending on your emotional resources, stress levels, and other factors. Communicating these changing needs prevents misunderstandings and allows for fluid adaptation within the relationship. Consider boundaries in multiple dimensions: physical, personal space, touch preferences; emotional, comfort level with disclosure; time-related, balancing together time with alone time; and practical division of responsibilities. When you establish clarity in these areas, you create conditions where both independence and intimacy can flourish simultaneously. Shared experience cultivation. The final component involves intentionally creating experiences that nurture connection while honoring autonomy. This might seem contradictory to avoidant tendencies, but it actually proves a structured way to practice intimacy with built-in independence. Activities that allow for parallel play, being together while engaged in individual pursuits, can serve as a gentle bridge. Think of reading books side by side, hiking, where conversation ebbs and flows naturally, or cooking together with different responsibilities. These experiences create togetherness without demanding constant interaction or emotional processing. Gradually, you can incorporate activities that require more coordination and interdependence, building confidence that connection doesn't necessarily threaten independence. The key is progression at a pace that feels manageable rather than overwhelming. Small positive experiences accumulate, gradually rewiring your attachment system to associate closeness with safety rather than threat. Each component of this framework interacts dynamically with the others. For instance, clear boundaries, Component 4, depend on understanding your core values, Component 1, and communicating them effectively, Component 3. Similarly, recognizing emotional triggers, Component 2, allows you to establish appropriate boundaries, Component 4, and choose shared experiences that feel sustainable, Component 5. The framework operates as an integrated system rather than a linear process. You might focus on different components at different times, depending on your current challenges and growth edges. What remains constant is the underlying philosophy. Independence and intimacy are complementary forces that, when balanced skillfully, create relationships of exceptional depth and vitality. The path to secure attachment involves neither abandoning your independence nor rejecting intimacy, but instead developing the capacity to embrace both simultaneously, creating relationships where autonomy and connection strengthen rather than diminish each other. The growth potential of balanced relationships. When we successfully balance independence and intimacy, something remarkable happens. Rather than draining our energy, relationships become sources of growth and vitality. This shift represents a fundamental reorientation for those with avoidant attachment patterns, who have often experienced relationships as depleting rather than enriching. Research from positive psychology shows that secure relationships actually expand our sense of self rather than constraining it. When we feel safe with another person, we become more willing to try new experiences, take healthy risks, and explore previously avoided aspects of ourselves. The security of the relationship provides a stable base from which we can venture into new territory, both external and internal. This dynamic resembles two trees growing near each other in a forest. From a distance, it might appear that they compete for sunlight and nutrients. A closer look reveals something more complex. Their intertwining root systems actually share resources and information through underground networks of fungi. Above ground, they may adjust their growth patterns to accommodate each other while still reaching toward the light. Together, they create a more resilient mini ecosystem than either could sustain alone. For avoidant individuals, the transformation often begins with small experiences that contradict core beliefs about relationships. Perhaps you share a vulnerability with your partner and receive understanding rather than judgment, or you express a need for space and find it respected rather than resisted. Each of these experiences creates a new neural pathway, gradually rewiring your expectations about what relationships can be. The quality of your relationships directly impacts your physical health as well. Numerous studies link secure social connections to lower inflammation levels, improved immune function, and even longer lifespans. But these benefits don't come from any relationship. They emerge specifically from connections that balance closeness with respect for individuality. Relationships that demand the sacrifice of autonomy actually increase stress hormones and negatively impact health. When you maintain your independence within relationships, you bring your authentic self to every interaction. This authenticity creates the conditions for genuine intimacy, being known and accepted for who you truly are, not for a performance of who you think you should be. Paradoxically, the freedom to be separate enables the deepest forms of connection. By embracing both independence and intimacy, you not only heal your attachment patterns, but unlock new dimensions of personal growth, creating relationships that enhance rather than constrain your authentic self. Harmony and contrast, independence and intimacy. As we've explored throughout this chapter, the journey toward healthy attachment doesn't require sacrificing who you are for connection. The false dichotomy between independence and intimacy has likely reinforced your avoidant tendencies, creating unnecessary barriers to fulfilling relationships. The truth we've uncovered together is liberating. You can maintain your cherished autonomy while opening yourself to deeper connections. This balance isn't just possible, it's essential for your personal growth and relationship satisfaction. By recognizing that independence and intimacy actually complement each other, you've begun dismantling one of the core misunderstandings that may have kept you isolated. Remember the strategies we've practiced: communicating boundaries clearly, recognizing interdependence as strength rather than weakness, and creating space within togetherness. These tools allow you to navigate relationships with both authenticity and openness. Your independence isn't threatened by connection. It's enhanced by it. The exercises you've completed have started rewiring how you perceive intimacy, no longer as a threat to your freedom, but as a resource that respects and values your autonomy. This shift represents significant progress on your healing journey. As you move forward, continue practicing the balance we've explored. Notice how maintaining your sense of self actually enables more meaningful connections, not fewer. When you bring your whole independent self to relationships, you create the foundation for intimacy that feels secure rather than suffocating. This new understanding forms a crucial bridge to the work ahead. You're learning to trust that closeness and autonomy can coexist. Perhaps the most critical insight for anyone with avoidant attachment patterns. Your path forward involves continuing to strengthen this understanding through practice and self-compassion. The courage you've shown in examining these patterns deserves acknowledgement. Each step toward balanced intimacy represents growth, even when progress feels slow. Trust that this new approach to relationships, one that honors both your need for independence and your capacity for connection, will gradually feel more natural with practice. What would it feel like to enter your next interaction carrying this knowledge? How might it change your responses to offers of closeness? Take these questions with you as we continue our journey together. The still point between independence and intimacy. Before we step into the next phase of healing, understanding how willpower alone cannot rewrite old attachment patterns, take a quiet moment to acknowledge how much work you've already done. You've begun unlearning the false dichotomy that told you independence and intimacy could not coexist. You've explored the ways your nervous system has been wired to protect you through distance, even as your heart quietly longed for connection. That awareness itself is a kind of healing. You've seen your patterns not as flaws, but as intelligent responses to pain. And that shift in perception changes everything. This space between what was and what's yet to come is sacred. It's the still point where insight becomes integration. Here, you can pause and feel the weight of your progress, the moments you stayed present when you might have withdrawn, the conversations you didn't avoid, the small openings you allowed in your carefully built walls. Healing avoidant attachment doesn't look dramatic. It looks like this: small, steady moments of choosing courage over comfort, curiosity over control. These are the quiet revolutions that rebuild trust in both self and others. Now I want to extend an invitation, not for me, but for someone who might be walking just a few steps behind you on the same path. Somewhere there's a listener searching for hope, someone who feels too broken, too distant, too different to ever feel safe in love. Your voice could be the signal that helps them see the possibility. If this audiobook has helped you soften your defenses, see yourself with more compassion, or begin to imagine closeness as safety rather than threat, would you take a moment to share that reflection in a brief review? Your honesty may be exactly what another person needs to begin their own recovery. A review doesn't just help this work reach more people. It extends the cycle of healing. It tells someone else, you are not alone, you are not defective, there's a way through. Think of it as an act of quiet generosity, a small offering that ripples outward into lives you may never know, but whose healing will echo yours. One honest paragraph from you can open a door for another person who still believes theirs is locked. Thank you for walking this delicate, courageous path. Thank you for being willing to see yourself clearly, to soften your armor, and to let understanding replace shame. By sharing your experience, even briefly, you help make emotional security more accessible to everyone who is still learning to trust. Your review doesn't have to be perfect or polished, just real. In doing so, you become part of a growing circle of people learning that independence and intimacy can not only coexist, but thrive together. Chapter 3: Rewiring Roots Beyond Willpower. Why willpower isn't enough in healing your attachment wounds. The path to secure attachment rarely begins with a simple decision to change. You've likely tried before, perhaps making promises to yourself about being more open, more trusting, or less withdrawn in relationships. Maybe you've even experienced brief successes through sheer determination. Yet despite your best intentions, those familiar patterns of pulling away, maintaining emotional distance, or feeling suffocated by closeness eventually resurface, often leaving you frustrated and discouraged. This frustration is not evidence of personal failure. Rather, it reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of how deeply rooted attachment patterns truly are. Avoidant attachment strategies weren't consciously chosen. They developed as protective responses during your formative years, when your emotional needs weren't consistently met. These patterns become encoded not just in your memories, but in your nervous system and neural pathways. They operate largely below conscious awareness, automatically activating when relationships trigger feelings of vulnerability or dependency. The limitations of willpower become apparent when we understand that avoidant attachment is not merely a habit or choice. but a complex adaptation woven into the very structure of how you process emotions and relate to others. Your brain literally organized itself around these early experiences, creating default responses that helped you navigate childhood relationships, but now interfere with adult connections. Trying to override these deeply embedded patterns through determination alone is like trying to change your accent by simply deciding to speak differently, possible in brief, concentrated moments, but difficult to sustain without addressing the underlying patterns. In this chapter, we'll explore the neurobiological origins of your avoidant attachment style, tracing how early interactions with caregivers shaped your approach to closeness and vulnerability. You'll discover why certain relationship dynamics trigger your withdrawal, and how these responses made perfect sense given your early environment. This understanding offers not just insight, but profound self-compassion. Recognition that your attachment style developed not because of personal deficiency, but as an intelligent adaptation to your circumstances. Building on this foundation of understanding, we'll introduce you to targeted techniques that work with, rather than against, your brain's natural functioning. Unlike approaches that rely on brute force willpower, these methods harness neuroplasticity, your brain's lifelong capacity to reorganize itself through new experiences. Through consistent practice of specific exercises, you'll begin to create alternative neural pathways that make secure attachment responses increasingly accessible and natural. These science-based approaches respect the intelligence of your defensive patterns while gently expanding your capacity for connection. Perhaps most importantly, this chapter marks a shift from self-criticism to curiosity. Many with avoidant attachment have internalized messages that there's something wrong with their need for space or independence. We'll reframe these traits as understandable responses rather than character flaws. From this compassionate stance, lasting change becomes possible, not through forcing yourself to feel differently, but through gradually expanding your window of tolerance for intimate connection. By understanding the roots of avoidance and working with your nervous system rather than against it, you'll discover that transformation arises not from trying harder, but from healing deeper, beyond surface solutions. Throughout this exploration, we'll continually return to a central truth. Meaningful attachment repair happens through integration, not suppression. The goal isn't to eliminate your need for autonomy or to ignore your boundaries, but to develop flexibility, the ability to move toward connection when it serves you rather than automatically retreating. By understanding the neurobiological origins of your patterns, implementing evidence-based practices for rewiring these responses, and approaching yourself with genuine compassion, you'll discover that lasting change emerges not from willpower's strain, but from healing's wisdom. The reluctance to connect. Sarah Morgan sat on her balcony watching the morning light cut through the buildings of downtown Chicago. The coffee in her mug had grown cold, forgotten like so many things in her life. 3 stories below, a couple walked hand in hand, leaning into each other with an ease that made Sarah's chest tighten. "You're overthinking again," she whispered to herself, turning away from the scene below. Michael's message still glowed on her phone screen. "I need more from you. I can't keep guessing what you're feeling." The words cut deeper than she wanted to admit. She had tried this time, truly tried to let him in. But when he reached for her emotionally, something ancient and familiar pulled her back into herself. The wind shifted, bringing with it the smell of rain. Sarah closed her eyes and remembered Dr. Levine's words from yesterday's session. "Your avoidance isn't a character flaw, Sarah. It's a protection strategy you developed as a child. Understanding its origins is more important than forcing yourself to change through sheer will." The therapist had shown her brain scans, explaining how early attachments formed neural pathways that now activated her fear response when someone got too close. Knowledge was supposed to be power, But knowledge alone hadn't stopped her from pushing Michael away last night. Inside her apartment, the framed photograph of her mother, distant and beautiful, seemed to judge her from the bookshelf. Sarah had spent years blaming herself for her inability to maintain relationships. She had made promises, set goals, created reminders on her phone to text back, to say I love you, to stay present during difficult conversations. But willpower always failed her in crucial moments. Dr. Levine had explained that the brain couldn't be disciplined into new patterns of attachment. It needed to be gently reshaped through consistent, safe experiences that contradicted old fears. Sarah picked up her phone again, her finger hovering over Michael's name. The true work wasn't in forcing herself to call him. She'd done that before. But in understanding why the very thought of vulnerability with him triggered such primal panic. A neighbor's door slammed in the hallway, jolting Sarah from her thoughts. The sound of keys dropping, a muffled curse, then laughter. Connection seemed so effortless for others. She opened her journal to a blank page, remembering another of Dr. Levine's suggestions. Write to your younger self. Understand what she needed then and what you need now. The pen felt heavy in her hand. Sarah had always believed that if she just tried harder, wanted it more, disciplined herself better, she could overcome the voice that whispered, "Run, before they see who you really are." But maybe the path forward wasn't through force at all. Maybe true change would come from meeting that frightened child within her, with the compassion and understanding she had never received. The first raindrop hit her window, followed quickly by others. Sarah watched the patterns they made, unique and interconnected. If her avoidant attachment style was formed when her young brain was making sense of an inconsistent world, could she really blame herself for the protective shell she'd built? And if willpower alone couldn't break through decades of neural programming, what would it take to create new pathways of trust and vulnerability that might someday feel as natural as breathing? The building blocks of attachment. The origins of avoidant attachment styles can be traced back to early childhood experiences, particularly within the first few years of life. During this critical developmental window, our brains form templates for how relationships work based on interactions with primary caregivers. When caregivers consistently respond to a child's needs with emotional distance, unpredictability, or dismissal of emotional expression, the foundation for avoidant attachment begins to take shape. Research shows these early patterns become encoded in our implicit memory systems, the unconscious behavioral blueprints that operate below our awareness, yet powerfully influence our adult relationships. Think of these early attachment experiences as the roots of a tree, hidden beneath the soil, yet fundamentally determining how the tree grows above ground. What appears on the surface, your adult relationship behaviors, directly reflects the unseen foundation below. The deeper and more entrenched these roots have grown, the more challenging they can be to reshape. Yet understanding their presence is the first crucial step toward transformation. These childhood experiences shape specific neural pathways that become strengthened through repetition. When a child learns that reaching out for connection results in rejection or disappointment, the brain adapts accordingly. Protective mechanisms develop to shield against the pain of unmet emotional needs. By adolescence, these protective strategies have often solidified into automatic responses that manifest as emotional detachment, discomfort with vulnerability, and a fierce need for self-reliance, all hallmarks of avoidant attachment in adulthood. The transition of these early patterns into adult relationship behaviors happens through surprisingly predictable channels. An adult with avoidant attachment often exhibits a characteristic push-pull dynamic in close relationships. The desire for connection exists alongside a powerful fear of engulfment or disappointment. This manifests as difficulty with emotional intimacy, discomfort with dependency, and a tendency to deactivate attachment needs when relationships become too close. The very behaviors intended as protection paradoxically create the relationship instability and disconnection the person fears most. When we examine avoidant attachment in adult relationships, we see consistent behavioral patterns emerge. These include maintaining emotional distance, prioritizing independence over interdependence, discomfort with displays of emotion, especially negative ones, and withdrawal during conflict. The avoidantly attached person typically struggles to communicate needs directly and may unconsciously sabotage relationships that begin to deepen. While these behaviors might appear as personal preferences or character traits, they represent adaptive strategies developed long ago to navigate an emotionally unreliable environment. The impact on relationships extends beyond the avoidantly attached individual. Partners often report feeling shut out, emotionally starved, or unable to establish the closeness they desire. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle. The more a partner pushes for connection, the more the avoidantly attached person feels threatened and withdraws, which prompts more pursuit. Without understanding the attachment dynamics at play, both parties can become trapped in patterns that leave each person's core needs unmet. Brain imaging studies have revealed fascinating insights into the neurobiological basis of attachment styles. When exposed to emotional stimuli or relationship triggers, individuals with avoidant attachment show distinct activation patterns in regions associated with emotion regulation and threat response. The amygdala, which processes emotional reactions, and the prefrontal cortex, which regulates those reactions, demonstrate altered functioning that reflects the emotional suppression typical of avoidant attachment. This evidence underscores that attachment patterns aren't simply personality quirks, but deeply embedded neural programming. Water shapes itself to the container it's held in, taking on the contours and limitations of its environment. Similarly, our attachment styles form in response to the emotional environment of our early years. Just as water frozen in a particular shape retains that form until conditions change, our attachment patterns remain fixed until we deliberately create the conditions for transformation. The seemingly rigid nature of these patterns reflects their deep neurological embedding rather than any inherent inflexibility. The origins of avoidant attachment are not character flaws or conscious choices, but adaptive responses to early relationship experiences that become encoded in neural circuitry, creating relationship patterns that persist until deliberately addressed through understanding and targeted intervention. Rewiring neural pathways for intimacy. The neuroscience of attachment offers compelling evidence that our relationship patterns can change throughout life. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections, provides the biological foundation for attachment transformation. Research shows that even long-established neural pathways can be modified through consistent, intentional practices that challenge existing patterns. This capacity remains active throughout adulthood, though the process requires more conscious effort than during childhood when these neural pathways initially formed. Picture your attachment patterns as a well-traveled path through a forest. Years of walking the same route have created a clear, easily accessible trail, while other potential paths remain overgrown and difficult to navigate. Changing your attachment style isn't about destroying the existing path, but gradually creating and strengthening alternative routes through consistent use. Over time, these new pathways become more accessible, though the original path never completely disappears. Effective change begins with increasing awareness of your automatic relationship responses. Mindfulness practices, specifically focused on relational patterns, can help identify the subtle triggers and bodily sensations that precede avoidant behaviors. Through regular practice, you can develop the ability to notice when you're beginning to emotionally withdraw, intellectualize feelings, or engage in other avoidant strategies. This awareness creates a crucial pause between trigger and reaction. A space for choice becomes possible. Research demonstrates that this mindful awareness activates the prefrontal cortex, which helps regulate the threat response system, often overactive in avoidant attachment. The process of gradually reshaping intimacy responses requires calibrated exposure to emotional vulnerability. Begin with identifying your personal window of tolerance, the zone where emotional connection feels challenging, but manageable rather than overwhelming. Small, consistent steps within this window allow your nervous system to slowly adapt to increased intimacy without triggering shutdown responses. This might involve practicing emotional expression in low-risk situations, gradually increasing self-disclosure with trusted individuals, or using journaling to explore emotions before sharing them with others. Cognitive restructuring techniques provide essential tools for addressing the core beliefs that maintain avoidant patterns. Avoidant attachment typically involves deeply held beliefs about relationships, that dependence is dangerous, emotions are overwhelming, or intimacy leads to pain. These beliefs operate largely outside conscious awareness, yet fundamentally shape relationship behaviors. Through structured reflection and questioning, you can bring these assumptions to light and evaluate their accuracy and usefulness in your current life. This process activates and strengthens neural connections in brain regions associated with cognitive flexibility and emotional integration. The role of secure relationship experiences in rewiring attachment cannot be overstated. The brain learns most effectively through lived experience, rather than intellectual understanding alone. This means that relationships with securely attached partners, therapists, or friends can provide corrective emotional experiences that challenge your avoidant expectations. When you anticipate rejection, but instead receive consistent acceptance, or expect criticism but receive understanding, your brain registers this discrepancy. Over time, these experiences weaken the neural connections supporting avoidant expectations and strengthen those associated with secure attachment. Emotional regulation skills form a crucial component of attachment rewiring. Avoidant attachment often develops as a way to manage overwhelming emotions in the absence of adequate external support. Learning to identify, tolerate, and regulate emotional states provides the foundation for a more secure connection. Practices like naming emotions specifically, tracking bodily sensations associated with different feelings, and developing personalized calming strategies enable you to stay present during emotional activation rather than automatically withdrawing or shutting down. Consistency proves more important than intensity in rewiring attachment patterns. Brief but regular practices that challenge avoidant tendencies create more lasting neural change than occasional intensive efforts. Consider implementing daily micro-practices, such as a 2-minute check-in with your emotional state, a brief vulnerable exchange with someone you trust, or a moment of intentionally choosing connection when you notice the urge to withdraw. These small actions, repeated consistently, gradually reshape neural pathways in ways that dramatic but infrequent efforts cannot. The timeline for attachment change varies significantly between individuals, influenced by factors including the severity of early experiences, the length of time avoidant patterns have been reinforced, the current relationship environment, and concurrent stressors. While some shifts in attachment security can occur within months of dedicated practice, complete transformation typically unfolds over years. This extended timeline reflects the deep neurological nature of attachment patterns and the layered process of creating and strengthening alternative neural pathways through repeated experience. Setbacks are not only normal but necessary components of the attachment rewiring process. When you encounter relationship situations that trigger strong avoidant responses, despite your best intentions, this doesn't signify failure, but opportunity. These moments highlight areas where neural rewiring remains incomplete and provide valuable information about specific triggers or beliefs requiring focused attention. Each instance of recognizing an avoidant response, even after it occurs, strengthens the neural pathways supporting awareness and creates the foundation for different choices in future similar situations. What if the most profound relationship changes occur not through forcing yourself to behave differently, but through gently rewiring the neural pathways that drive your automatic responses to intimacy? The Attachment Styles Reframing Model, ASRM. Understanding and changing your attachment patterns requires a structured approach that addresses both the origins and manifestations of avoidant tendencies. The Attachment Styles Reframing Model provides this framework, guiding you through the process of transforming fear-based reactions into secure connections. Let's explore how this three-stage model creates lasting change through understanding rather than willpower alone. Stage 1. Introspective awareness. The journey toward attachment transformation begins with developing a clear awareness of your unique avoidant patterns and their origins. This foundational stage involves turning inward with curiosity, rather than judgment, creating a detailed map of your attachment landscape. Through structured self-reflection exercises, you'll identify specific moments from childhood that shaped your beliefs about relationships, particularly experiences where emotional needs went unmet or were actively discouraged. Effective introspection requires developing what physiologists call the observing self, a perspective that can notice patterns without becoming entangled in them. This capacity allows you to recognize when avoidant behaviors are activated and to identify the specific triggers that precede them. You might notice, for instance, that you begin to emotionally withdraw when a partner expresses disappointment, or that you change the subject when conversations turn to feelings. These observations create the essential foundation for change. This stage also involves exploring the protective function of avoidant behaviors. Rather than viewing these patterns as problems to eliminate, you'll examine how they once served as necessary adaptations to your early environment. Perhaps emotional distance protected you from rejection, or self-reliance shielded you from the pain of unreliable caregivers. Acknowledging these protective functions with compassion shifts your relationship to avoidant behaviors, reducing shame and creating space for change. The introspection stage culminates in creating personal awareness tools tailored to your specific patterns. These might include a personalized inventory of physical sensations that signal emotional withdrawal, a list of situations that reliably trigger avoidant responses, or a journal template for tracking relationship reactions. These tools transform vague awareness into precise understanding, establishing the foundation for targeted change. Stage 2. Educational integration. Building on self-awareness, the second stage focuses on understanding the neurobiological underpinnings of attachment patterns. Here, you'll explore how early experiences literally shaped your brain structure and functioning, creating neural pathways that continue to influence your relationship behaviors. This education extends beyond intellectual understanding to embodied knowledge that connects abstract concepts with your lived experience. The educational stage emphasizes understanding attachment as an evolutionary adaptation designed to ensure survival through maintaining proximity to caregivers. You'll explore how the attachment system interacts with other neurological systems, particularly those governing threat response and emotional regulation. This knowledge helps explain why avoidant patterns can feel so automatic and powerful. They're connected to primitive brain regions that process potential threats before conscious awareness. Through studying the specific brain mechanisms involved in attachment, you'll gain insight into why willpower alone proves insufficient for creating lasting change. Research on neuroplasticity offers a more effective alternative, demonstrating how repeated experiences and focused attention gradually create new neural pathways. This understanding shifts expectations from immediate transformation to gradual, consistent progress through deliberate practice, a more realistic and sustainable approach. This stage also explores the interplay between attachment and other aspects of psychological functioning. You'll examine connections between avoidant attachment and elements such as emotional awareness, identity development, and coping strategies. This integrated understanding prevents the common mistake of addressing attachment in isolation, recognizing instead how it forms part of a complex physiological ecosystem, where changes in one area influence the entire system. The educational component incorporates practical applications of neuroscience principles to everyday relationship situations. You'll learn to recognize when your attachment system is activated, distinguish between genuine threats and attachment triggers, and implement strategies for re-engaging the prefrontal cortex during emotional activation. These practical applications transform abstract knowledge into valuable tools for navigating relationship challenges. The final element of educational integration involves understanding attachment patterns as existing on a spectrum rather than as fixed categories. This nuanced perspective acknowledges that most people display aspects of multiple attachment styles, depending on context, relationship history, and current circumstances. Recognizing this flexibility counters the discouraging belief that attachment styles are immutable personality traits, fostering hope and motivation for change. Stage 3. Transformational techniques. The third stage of the model focuses on implementing specific practices that gradually reshape your relationship to intimacy. These techniques build systematically on the awareness and understanding developed in the previous stages, creating a practical pathway for transforming avoidant patterns. The emphasis shifts from knowing to doing, with carefully sequenced exercises that build capacity for emotional connection. Central to this stage is the practice of titrated exposure to emotional vulnerability. This approach applies principles from exposure therapy to the realm of emotional intimacy, gradually increasing your tolerance for connection. Beginning with experiences that trigger minimal avoidant responses, you systematically progress toward more challenging situations. This careful calibration ensures you remain within your window of tolerance, where productive learning can occur, avoiding both overwhelming activation and disengagement. The transformational stage incorporates somatic awareness practices that address attachment patterns at the bodily level, where they're often most powerfully encoded. These practices help you identify and work with physical manifestations of avoidance, tension patterns, changes in breathing, subtle withdrawal movements, and developing the ability to stay physically present during emotional activation. Research confirms that addressing these embodied aspects of attachment creates more comprehensive and lasting change than purely cognitive approaches. Strategic relationship experiences form another core component of this stage. While general relationship quality certainly influences attachment security, this model emphasizes specific interactions designed to directly challenge avoidant expectations. These might include structured vulnerability exercises with trusted others, intentional repair following disconnection, or planned experiences of receiving support during difficulty. These experiences provide direct counter-evidence to core avoidant beliefs, gradually reshaping your expectations of relationships. The transformational techniques include specific practices for different manifestations of avoidant attachment. For example, if you tend toward emotional suppression, you might focus on exercises that build emotional vocabulary and expression. If your pattern involves intellectualization, practices emphasizing bodily awareness and direct emotional experience might prove most beneficial. This tailored approach recognizes the diversity within avoidant attachment, avoiding one-size-fits-all solutions. This stage also addresses the inevitable setbacks and resistance that emerge during attachment transformation. Rather than viewing these as failures, the model incorporates them as valuable information about areas requiring additional attention. You'll learn to recognize when avoidant patterns intensify in response to change efforts, a natural protective response to perceived threat, and to work with this resistance compassionately rather than forcing change through willpower. Interconnections within the model. The 3 stages of the attachment styles reframing model operate as an integrated system rather than sequential steps to be completed. While introspection logically precedes education and transformation, in practice, these processes function as a continuous feedback loop. Greater awareness reveals new areas for educational exploration, while application of transformational techniques generates new insights requiring introspection. This dynamic interplay creates a self-reinforcing cycle that deepens understanding and change over time. The relationship between awareness and transformation highlights a key principle of the model. Change occurs most effectively at the edge of current capacity. Too little change fails to stimulate growth, while too much triggers defensive avoidance. The introspective stage helps identify the optimal growth zone, while the educational component provides context for understanding resistance, and the transformational techniques offer structured ways to work at this edge. This calibrated approach replaces the willpower-based push past comfort zones that often backfires with avoidant attachment. The model's effectiveness stems partly from its simultaneous engagement with multiple levels of experience. Cognitive understanding, emotional awareness, physiological regulation, and behavioral practice mutually reinforce each other, creating comprehensive change that persists across contexts. This multidimensional approach addresses a common limitation of attachment interventions that focus exclusively on either understanding or behavior while neglecting their interconnection. The temporal dimension represents another crucial aspect of the model's integration. While the stages may appear to unfold in the present, they simultaneously address past formative experiences and future relationship patterns. This temporal integration allows for reprocessing historical experiences with adult resources, while projecting new possibilities forward. The result transcends simply coping with attachment insecurity in the present moment to create a lasting transformation that evolves over time. Understanding the origins of avoidant attachment through introspection, gaining knowledge about the neuroscience behind these patterns, and implementing targeted techniques for transformation creates a comprehensive approach that addresses the root causes rather than symptoms, enabling more profound, more sustainable change than willpower alone could ever achieve. Physiological archaeology. Understanding our attachment patterns requires a willingness to excavate the past with intention and care. The origins of avoidant attachment typically trace back to childhood experiences that may seem mundane on the surface, yet profoundly shaped your relationship expectations. Perhaps emotional expression was discouraged in your family, needs were consistently overlooked, or independence was prematurely emphasized. These repeated interactions created implicit learning about the reliability and safety of close relationships. The human brain processes remarkable adaptive capabilities, especially during early development. When a child encounters an environment where emotional needs are consistently dismissed or met with annoyance, the brain adapts accordingly. Neural pathways form that associate vulnerability with disappointment or rejection. These adaptations serve a protective function in the original environment, but continue influencing relationships long after they're needed, like an alarm system that remains activated after the danger has passed. Consider how your early attachment experiences might be playing out in your adult relationships. Do you find yourself pulling away when connections deepen? Do you prioritize self-sufficiency over interdependence? Are you more comfortable giving support than receiving it? These patterns don't represent character flaws, but adaptive responses that once served important functions. Recognizing them as learned strategies rather than inherent traits creates space for change that simple willpower cannot. The path to changing these deeply embedded patterns requires understanding that makes change possible, not just determination to be different. When we try to force ourselves to be more emotionally available without addressing the underlying protective mechanisms, we create internal conflict rather than transformation. The nervous system continues responding to perceived threats based on early programming, while conscious intentions pull in the opposite direction, a recipe for frustration and discouragement. Our attachment patterns represent sophisticated adaptations to early environments rather than character flaws, and lasting change emerges from understanding these origins rather than battling against ourselves through willpower alone. Neuroscience as pathway. Recent advances in neuroscience have transformed our understanding of attachment, revealing the specific brain mechanisms underlying our relationship patterns. Research using functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, shows that attachment styles correlate with distinct patterns of neural activation, particularly in regions associated with emotional processing, social cognition, and self-regulation. These findings confirm that attachment patterns are literally wired into our neural architecture, not simply psychological preferences or habits. The brain's remarkable neuroplasticity, its ability to form new connections and reorganize existing ones, provides the biological foundation for attachment change. This plasticity means that while early experiences created certain neural patterns, new experiences can gradually create alternative pathways. Understanding this neurobiological reality shifts the focus from trying to override existing patterns through sheer force of will to intentionally creating conditions that facilitate neural rewiring through consistent new experiences. Picture how water flowing down a hillside gradually carves channels in the earth. Over time, these channels deepen, directing the water's flow along established pathways of least resistance. Similarly, repeated early experiences create neural channels that direct your responses to relationships along predictable paths. Changing these patterns isn't about damming the water through willpower, but gradually creating new channels through consistent alternative experiences that eventually redirect the flow. The brain's threat detection system plays a crucial role in maintaining avoidant attachment patterns. When intimacy triggers unconscious associations with past disappointment or rejection, the amygdala, a key structure in processing emotional reactions, activates, as if facing physical danger. This activation occurs before conscious awareness, explaining why logical understanding alone rarely changes emotional responses. Effective intervention must address these rapid, automatic reactions at their source through repeated experiences that gradually recalibrate the threat detection system. Effective attachment change engages multiple brain systems simultaneously. Cognitive understanding activates prefrontal regions associated with executive function and conscious processing. Mindfulness practices strengthen connections between these prefrontal areas and limbic regions, involved in emotional reactions. Corrective relationship experiences provide direct input that contradicts existing neural expectations. This multi-level engagement creates more comprehensive neural reorganization than approaches targeting only conscious intentions or behaviors. The brain's memory systems further explain why willpower proves insufficient for attachment change. Implicit memory, operating outside conscious awareness, stores emotional experiences and relationship expectations without time markers or context. This system continues influencing current reactions regardless of conscious understanding or intentions. Change requires creating new implicit learning through consistent experiences that contradict existing patterns, gradually building alternative neural networks that can compete with established pathways. What might become possible in your relationships if you focus less on forcing yourself to be different and more on understanding and rewiring the neural pathways that automatically guide your responses to intimacy? The limitations of willpower. Willpower operates primarily through conscious control, engaging the prefrontal cortex to override automatic responses. While this function serves many valuable purposes, it has significant limitations when applied to attachment patterns. The prefrontal regions responsible for conscious control fatigue easily, function poorly under stress, and require considerable energy to maintain. precisely when attachment triggers are most likely to activate. This explains why even strong determination to be different in relationships often fails during emotional activation. Traditional approaches to changing relationship patterns often emphasize commitment and effort, trying harder to communicate, forcing vulnerability, or pushing through discomfort. These approaches reflect a fundamental misunderstanding of how attachment systems operate. When avoidant responses activate, they trigger primitive survival mechanisms that automatically override conscious intentions. No amount of determination can consistently counteract these deeply embedded protective responses without addressing their neurobiological foundations. Consider your own experience with trying to change relationship patterns through sheer determination. Perhaps you've resolved to be more emotionally open or to stop withdrawing during conflict. How effective were these intentions when strong emotions arose? Most people find that willpower dissolves precisely when needed most, as the attachment system activates in response to perceived threats. This predictable pattern reflects the biological reality that different brain systems operate at varying levels of consciousness and with different priorities. The limitations of willpower become clearer when we consider the multiple systems involved in attachment responses. The conscious mind that makes resolutions operates primarily through explicit memory and verbal reasoning, while attachment behaviors emerge from implicit memory systems that store emotional experiences and bodily responses. These systems speak different neurological languages, explaining why conscious understanding often fails to translate into emotional change. True transformation requires approaches that address both systems in their native languages. The path to secure attachment lies not in forcing change through willpower, but in creating conditions that allow your attachment system to gradually reorganize itself through understanding, compassion, and strategically designed experiences. The Rewiring Blueprint, From Understanding to Integration. The journey through your attachment origins isn't just about uncovering past wounds. It's about fundamentally reshaping how your brain processes connection. When you understand that your avoidant behaviors weren't conscious choices but protective adaptations, you free yourself from the cycle of self-blame that so often accompanies relationship struggles. True transformation happens below the surface of conscious effort. Your brain developed its protective patterns for good reasons, and acknowledging this truth honors your past while creating space for growth. This deeper work transcends the limitations of willpower alone, which inevitably falters in moments of stress or vulnerability. The steps we've explored provide more than just behavioral techniques. They offer a comprehensive rewiring strategy that addresses both the neurological and emotional dimensions of avoidant attachment. Number 1. Education Foundation, 2 to 4 weeks. Immerse yourself in attachment theory literature that resonates with your experiences. Look for those moments of recognition when an author's words mirror your own relationship patterns. This knowledge becomes the cornerstone for all subsequent change. Number 2. Trigger Identification, ongoing, 10 minutes daily. Your attachment journal becomes a personal map of your emotional landscape. Record not just what happened during intimate moments, but the physical sensations and thoughts that accompanied your discomfort. These entries reveal patterns that might otherwise remain invisible. Step 3. Mindfulness practice, 5 to 15 minutes daily. Learning to observe your attachment responses without immediate reaction creates vital space between trigger and behavior. When you feel the familiar urge to withdraw, pause to notice the sensation in your body. Perhaps tightness in your chest or a desire to physically distance yourself. Step 4. Progressive exposure, weekly goals, 3 to 6 months. Each small step toward greater vulnerability builds neural pathways that support connection. Begin with sharing something minor with a trusted friend, gradually working toward expressing needs or emotions with romantic partners. Step 5. Self-reinforcement, after each exposure exercise. Celebrate every moment of chosen vulnerability, no matter how small. Write down these victories and review them when avoidant impulses feel overwhelming. Your brain responds powerfully to this positive acknowledgement. Step 6. Reflective integration. Weekly, 30 minutes. Regular review of your progress creates a narrative of growth that counters the old story of necessary self-protection. Ask yourself, what feels different now compared to 3 months ago? What intimate moments feel less threatening? This structured approach succeeds where willpower fails, because it works with your neurobiology rather than against it. You're not forcing yourself to behave differently despite your feelings. You're gradually changing how intimacy feels at a fundamental level. The most profound shifts often happen subtly. You might notice one day that sharing a difficult emotion with your partner feels natural rather than threatening. Or perhaps you'll realize you stayed present during a conflict instead of mentally checking out. These moments are accidents or temporary victories of willpower. They're evidence of genuine neural reorganization. As we move toward the next chapter, remember that this work unfolds in its own time. Your avoidant patterns developed over years, and while rewiring can happen more quickly, lasting change requires patience. Trust that each step in this process builds upon the last, creating a foundation for relationships characterized not by fear, but by secure connection. Your capacity for intimacy was always there, waiting beneath protective layers. By understanding the roots of avoidance and applying these neuroscience-based strategies, you're not creating something new. You're uncovering what was always possible. Chapter 4. The Safety of Closeness. Retraining the Heart. From Threat to Sanctuary. Rewiring your brain for intimacy. The path to emotional security often feels like navigating unfamiliar terrain. For those with avoidant attachment patterns, closeness triggers an internal alarm system that equates vulnerability with danger. What if there was a way to reprogram this deeply embedded response? This chapter introduces a revolutionary yet intuitive approach, systematically retraining your brain to recognize safety in connection rather than threat. When we examine the neuroscience behind avoidant attachment, we discover that your brain isn't broken. It's simply running outdated protective software. Each time you've withdrawn from emotional intimacy, your nervous system reinforced neural pathways that associate vulnerability with pain. This isn't your fault. These patterns developed as essential survival mechanisms during times when emotional protection was necessary. Yet now, these same protective responses may be preventing the very connections you secretly long for. The good news? Your brain remains remarkably adaptable throughout your entire life. Neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections, means that with consistent, gradual practice, you can literally rewire your attachment responses. Think of it as gently persuading your nervous system that the monster it fears under the bed doesn't actually exist. The key lies not in forcing yourself into overwhelming vulnerability, but in creating measured experiences of emotional safety that your brain can process without triggering shutdown. Throughout our journey in previous chapters, we've explored the origins of avoidant attachment and developed awareness of our personal patterns. We've examined how these patterns manifest in relationships and begun the work of self-compassion. Now we're ready to take the next crucial step, actively retraining your heart to recognize intimacy as nurturing rather than threatening. This transformation doesn't happen through intellectual understanding alone. It requires carefully calibrated emotional experiences that challenge your brain's default settings. This approach honors an essential truth that many therapeutic interventions overlook. You cannot rush the brain's adaptation to emotional vulnerability. Just as you wouldn't expect someone with a fear of heights to start their exposure therapy on the edge of a skyscraper, we won't ask you to dive into the deepest waters of intimacy before you're ready. Instead, we'll introduce a graduated pathway that respects your nervous system's need for incremental change. creating a series of manageable challenges that expand your capacity for closeness one step at a time. In the sections that follow, you'll discover how to systematically expand your comfort zone through 3 interconnected approaches. First, we'll explore the process of incremental exposure, carefully designed experiences that gradually shift your perception of closeness from threatening to safe. Next, you'll learn gentle techniques to dismantle the ingrained defensive mechanisms that have been standing guard around your heart. Finally, we'll help you develop a personalized roadmap for increasing your comfort with intimacy, perfectly calibrated to match your brain's capacity to incorporate new emotional experiences. This chapter represents the culmination of everything we've discussed so far, bringing together your understanding of attachment theory, your awareness of personal patterns, and your growing self-compassion into a concrete plan for transformation. The practices you'll learn here form the bridge between insight and actual change, offering not just understanding, but a pathway to experiencing relationships in an entirely new way. By honoring both your need for safety and your desire for connection, these approaches make possible what may have once seemed unattainable: the ability to remain present and engaged even when relationships trigger your deepest vulnerabilities. As we embark on this final phase of our journey together, remember that this work isn't about erasing your independent nature or forcing yourself to become someone you're not. Instead, it's about expanding your emotional range and choices, maintaining your autonomy while adding the capacity for genuine closeness. The ability to feel safe in connection represents not the diminishment of self, but its expansion into new territories of human experience that have always been your birthright. The slow unfurling of trust. The morning light filtered through the half-drawn blinds, casting thin strips across David's bedroom floor. He sat on the edge of his bed, fingers clasped together, staring at the wall where a single-framed photograph hung. Him and Sarah at the beach last summer, both smiling, a genuine smile on his face, a forced one on hers. He knew the difference now. "You need to let her in," his therapist had told him yesterday. "Bit by bit, the wall you've built won't come down in a day." David rubbed his eyes. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Still on for dinner tonight?" He set it down without answering, the knot in his stomach tightening. 3 months of dating, and he still flinched when she reached for his hand without warning. Still changed the subject when conversations drifted toward his childhood or past relationships. Still kept the spare key she'd given him buried in his dresser drawer beneath old t-shirts. Outside, rain began to fall, soft droplets tapping against the window pane like nervous fingers. The sound pulled him from his thoughts. He stood and crossed to the window, pressing his palm against the cool glass. The neighbor's cat darted beneath a parked car for shelter, a gray blur against wet concrete. David watched it huddle there, small and protected in its temporary hiding place. He understood the instinct. His phone buzzed again. Sarah wasn't giving up. The thought both warmed and terrified him. David picked up the phone, reading her follow-up message. "No pressure. We can just watch a movie if you want. No big talks tonight." He could picture her typing it, curled up in that oversized armchair in her apartment, the one with the threadbare arms she refused to replace because it had been her grandmother's. The way she'd bite her lower lip as she chose her words carefully, knowing his tendency to retreat. The memory of her patience loosened something in his chest. Perhaps tonight he would tell her about his father leaving. Just that one piece, not everything at once, just enough to test if the ground remained solid beneath him when the words left his mouth. Just enough to see if she stayed. The rain fell harder now. David pressed his forehead against the glass and closed his eyes. What would it feel like, he wondered, to one day wake up beside her without the immediate impulse to create distance? To feel her reach for him and not brace for impact, to speak the truth of himself and trust that the telling wouldn't leave him more alone than before. The water streaked down the window in crooked paths, connecting and separating like the thoughts in his mind. He picked up the phone and typed, "Yes, I'll bring dinner. There's something small I want to tell you." His fingers hovered over the send button for 3 long breaths before pressing down. A step, small but real, like learning to walk again after a long time of standing still. How many such small steps would it take, David wondered, before his brain would recognize closeness as sanctuary rather than danger? Retraining the heart's response to intimacy. The brain's perception of closeness as a threat is not a permanent condition, but a learned response. For individuals with avoidant attachment styles, the neural pathways that associate vulnerability with danger have been strengthened through repeated experiences and reinforcement. These associations often began in early childhood, when dependency needs were consistently unmet or even punished. Over time, the brain developed protective mechanisms, creating a strong aversion to situations that trigger vulnerability. Think of these neural pathways as hiking trails in a dense forest. The more frequently a path is traveled, the more defined and easily accessible it becomes. The trail of avoidance has been walked so often that it's now a wide, clear path. The brain's default route when confronted with emotional intimacy. But with conscious effort and consistent practice, new trails can be forged through the undergrowth, eventually offering alternative routes that lead to connection rather than isolation. Incremental exposure therapy works by gradually introducing small doses of vulnerability in safe contexts. This approach respects the brain's need for time to process and adapt to new experiences without triggering overwhelming defense mechanisms. When we expose ourselves to manageable amounts of emotional openness, we allow our nervous system to stay regulated while simultaneously challenging our fear response. The key is finding the sweet spot between comfort and growth. Too little exposure won't create change, while too much can reinforce avoidance patterns through overwhelming fear responses. Each successful exposure experience serves as evidence that contradicts the brain's prediction of disaster. When you share a small vulnerability and discover that rejection doesn't follow, your brain begins to update its threat assessment. This process of prediction error, expecting a negative outcome but experiencing a neutral or positive one, is crucial for rewiring neural connections. The brain gradually learns that the anticipated catastrophe doesn't materialize, weakening the association between vulnerability and threat. This process requires patience and persistence. Neural rewiring isn't accomplished through a single powerful experience, but through consistent, repeated exposure to situations that challenge existing beliefs. Small steps taken regularly have a cumulative effect, gradually shifting the brain's automatic responses. For example, practicing simple disclosures like sharing a minor preference or opinion with others can serve as early exposure exercises, building up to more significant emotional revelations as comfort increases. Safety is paramount during this process. Working with a therapist or trusted friend who responds supportively to your vulnerability attempts creates an environment conducive to neural rewiring. Their consistent, non-judgmental responses help establish new associations between openness and safety. This supportive context allows you to experience vulnerability without the reinforcement of negative outcomes, accelerating the brain's learning process. Progress isn't linear. There will be days when avoidance feels overwhelmingly strong, and retreating to old patterns seems necessary for emotional survival. These setbacks don't erase progress. They're part of the normal learning curve as the brain navigates competing neural pathways. When regression occurs, self-compassion becomes essential. Understanding that these moments don't define the overall trajectory helps maintain momentum towards secure attachment. Your body keeps score of both negative and positive experiences. As you accumulate experiences of safe vulnerability, your physiology begins to respond differently to intimacy cues. The heightened heart rate, shallow breathing, and muscle tension that once accompanied emotional closeness gradually subside. The physiological shift isn't just psychological. It represents concrete changes in how your nervous system interprets and responds to connection opportunities. One powerful way to facilitate this process is through mindful attention to bodily responses during vulnerability exercises. By noticing physical reactions without judgment, you can distinguish between genuine danger signals and conditioned fear responses. This awareness creates space between stimulus and reaction, allowing you to consciously choose new behaviors rather than defaulting to avoidance. The gradual exposure to vulnerability in safe contexts teaches your brain that closeness can be safe, rewiring neural pathways and creating new possibilities for connection. Breaking down defense mechanisms without breaking down. Avoidant attachment defenses develop as protective adaptations to environments where emotional needs were consistently unmet or punished. These defensive mechanisms, emotional numbing, deflection through intellect, and self-reliance to the point of isolation, once served as essential survival strategies. Recognizing that these patterns were adaptive responses rather than character flaws is the first step toward dismantling them with self-compassion rather than judgment. What would it feel like to honor these defenses for their original protective purpose, while gently acknowledging they may no longer serve you? These physiological shields weren't created from weakness, but from the strength of a young psyche determined to protect itself from emotional harm. By approaching your defenses with curiosity rather than criticism, you create space for understanding their underlying purpose and the legitimate needs they've been trying to meet. Defensive mechanisms operate largely outside conscious awareness. They activate automatically when the brain perceives a threat to emotional safety, often before you're consciously aware of feeling vulnerable. This automatic quality makes them particularly challenging to modify, as you can't change what you don't notice. Developing an observer perspective, the ability to witness your defensive responses as they arise, creates a crucial pause between trigger and reaction, allowing for new choices. Consider your defenses as loyal but overprotective guardians. Like a security system that sounds the alarm at every passing shadow, they err on the side of caution, interpreting innocent gestures as threats. This hypervigilance made sense in past environments where emotional danger lurked, but in the context of healthier relationships, it prevents connection. Rather than attempting to dismantle these defenses all at once, the goal is to gradually adjust their sensitivity while honoring their protective intent. Identifying your specific defense patterns requires honest self-reflection. Do you intellectualize emotions, transforming feelings into thoughts to maintain emotional distance? Perhaps you reflexively change the subject when conversations become personal, or preemptively find fault with others before they can reject you. Maybe your defense manifests as excessive self-reliance, refusing help even when struggling. Each person's defensive constellation is unique, shaped by their specific attachment history and temperament. The paradox of defensive mechanisms is that while they aim to protect us from pain, they often create the very suffering they're designed to prevent. The wall that shields you from rejection also blocks genuine connection. The emotional numbing that dampens hurt also mutes joy and love. The hyper-independence that prevents disappointment also ensures isolation. Recognizing this paradox doesn't mean tearing down defenses overnight. It means gradually creating small openings that allow both vulnerability and new possibilities. Working with defenses requires consistent practice in expanding your window of tolerance, the range within which emotional arousal feels manageable rather than overwhelming. This expansion happens through deliberate exposure to mild discomfort while maintaining regulatory capacity. For example, if sharing personal information triggers defensive withdrawal, practice sharing small, low-risk disclosures with safe people, then gradually increasing disclosure depth as comfort grows. Progress in dismantling defenses often feels like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. During times of stress or in triggering situations, old defensive patterns naturally resurface. This regression isn't a failure, but a normal part of the rewiring process. The goal isn't perfect vulnerability, but an expanding capacity for authentic connection alongside healthy boundaries and discernment about when protection is genuinely needed. Journaling about defensive reactions can accelerate awareness. When you notice a defense response activating, pause to document the trigger, your emotional and physical reactions, the thoughts accompanying the defense, and what might have happened if you hadn't defended. This practice builds the metacognitive skills necessary for interrupting automatic patterns and choosing alternative responses aligned with your current needs rather than past conditioning. Working with a therapist trained in attachment-focused approaches provides invaluable support for this process. The therapeutic relationship itself becomes a laboratory for noticing and modifying defensive patterns in real time, with the therapist offering the attuned, consistent response, often missing in early attachment experiences. This reparative relationship demonstrates that vulnerability can be met with acceptance, gradually retraining the nervous system's response to closeness. What might become possible in your relationships if you can maintain your legitimate need for safety while creating small openings in your defensive walls, just enough to let connection in? Practical steps toward greater intimacy. The journey towards secure attachment requires a structured approach that respects both your current limitations and your capacity for growth. Developing comfort with intimacy isn't about forcing vulnerability, but creating conditions where closeness feels increasingly safe. This process requires patience, as neural adaptation occurs gradually through consistent exposure to new relational experiences. Consider how your comfort with physical exercise develops. A person who hasn't exercised in years wouldn't begin with an intense workout. They'd start with gentle movement, gradually building strength and endurance. Similarly, emotional vulnerability muscles need progressive training, starting with manageable challenges and slowly increasing intensity as capacity grows. Rushing this process typically triggers overwhelm and reinforces avoidance rather than facilitating growth. The most effective approach involves creating a personalized plan that addresses your unique attachment history, triggers, and goals. This plan should include specific, measurable steps rather than vague aspirations like, be more open. For example, rather than share more, a specific goal might be, share one genuine feeling about my day with my partner 3 times this week. This specificity creates clear direction while maintaining realistic expectations. Importantly, increasing comfort with intimacy requires balancing challenge with recovery. Just as muscles need rest between workouts to strengthen, your emotional system needs integration time between vulnerability experiences. Schedule deliberate periods of solitude and reflection after meaningful connection attempts, allowing your nervous system to process and adapt to new experiences without overwhelm. The BRAVE framework for incremental vulnerability. Baseline assessment. The journey toward greater intimacy begins with honest self-reflection about your current relationship with vulnerability. This initial assessment establishes your starting point and helps identify patterns that have shaped your approach to closeness. Take time to explore questions like, what specific aspects of emotional intimacy trigger your strongest avoidance responses? When did you first notice these patterns emerging? How did these defenses manifest in your body? Tension, numbness, or urge to flee? What beliefs about relationships underlie your protective strategies? The baseline assessment should extend beyond identifying challenges to recognizing existing strengths and resources. Perhaps you're comfortable with intellectual disclosure, but struggle with emotional expression. Or you connect easily in structured settings, but withdraw in unplanned intimate moments. Acknowledging these nuances creates a more accurate map of your attachment landscape, revealing both areas for growth and foundations to build upon. Ranked exposure hierarchy. With your baseline established, the next step involves creating a personalized vulnerability ladder, a ranked list of intimacy situations from least to most challenging. This hierarchy becomes your roadmap for systematic exposure, allowing you to progress gradually from manageable experiences to more significant challenges as your comfort zone expands. Your vulnerability hierarchy might begin with relatively safe disclosures, like sharing an opinion about a neutral topic, progress to expressing preferences or minor disappointments, and then advance to revealing deeper feelings or needs. The specific content of your hierarchy should reflect your unique triggers and goals rather than following a predetermined sequence. The key is creating sufficient graduation between steps to ensure manageable progress without overwhelming your nervous system's capacity for adaptation. Active practice sessions. With your hierarchy established, the framework moves into structured implementation through planned vulnerability practices. These practice sessions should occur regularly, ideally several times weekly, with clear intentions and parameters. Begin with situations ranked lowest on your hierarchy, staying with each level until it generates minimal distress before progressing to more challenging exposures. These practice sessions are most effective when approached methodically. Before each practice, set a specific intention for what you'll share and with whom. During the interaction, maintain mindful awareness of your bodily responses and defensive impulses without automatically acting on them. Afterward, reflect on what you noticed, what surprised you, and what you learned that might inform future practices. This deliberate approach transforms casual interactions into meaningful learning opportunities that gradually reshape your relationship with vulnerability. Validation through recording. Maintaining a dedicated journal throughout this process serves multiple purposes essential for attachment rewiring. Regular documentation of your experiences creates a concrete record of progress that counters the common tendency to dismiss or forget growth. When avoidance feels particularly strong, reviewing earlier entries reminds you of already traversed territory and reinforces motivation to continue. This recording practice should capture both objective observations and subjective experiences. Note the specific vulnerability practiced, the context, your emotional and physical responses, the other person's reaction, and any insights gained. Over time, patterns emerge in these records, revealing both progress and remaining challenges. The act of writing itself also creates reflective distance from immediate reactions, enhancing your capacity to observe rather than be consumed by attachment triggers. Environmental support. No meaningful attachment change occurs in isolation. Creating environmental conditions that support vulnerability is crucial for sustainable progress. This component involves deliberately cultivating relationships with people who respond to openness with acceptance and empathy, rather than judgment or dismissal. These supportive connections might include therapists, trusted friends, support groups, or partners committed to understanding attachment dynamics. Beyond people, environmental support includes creating physical and emotional spaces conducive to vulnerability practice. This might mean establishing regular check-ins with a partner where sharing is explicitly welcomed, joining communities where authentic connection is valued, or creating personal rituals that signal safety to your nervous system before attempting more challenging vulnerability exercises. These environmental factors significantly influence your brain's willingness to recategorize intimacy as safe rather than threatening. The BRAVE framework functions as an integrated system rather than a linear sequence. Each component consciously informs and refines the other. Your baseline assessment evolves as new insights emerge through practice. Your exposure hierarchy adjusts based on discoveries about which situations prove more or less challenging than anticipated. Your practice sessions generate material for validation records, which, in turn, guide future practice focus. And throughout, your environmental supports provide both safety for current efforts and stretching opportunities for continued growth. This framework respects the brain's inherent plasticity while acknowledging its need for consistency and safety during change processes. Neural pathways don't transform through single events, but through repeated experiences that contradict established expectations. When your brain consistently encounters evidence that vulnerability can lead to connection rather than rejection, new associative patterns gradually strengthen, while old defensive responses weaken through disuse. Perhaps most importantly, the BRAVE framework emphasizes agency and choice throughout the attachment rewiring process. Rather than positioning avoidant patterns as flaws to eliminate, this approach honors their protective origins while creating space for new possibilities more aligned with current relational goals. This respectful stance toward all parts of your attachment history, including the defensive strategies that once served essential purposes, facilitates integration rather than internal conflict. By implementing a structured approach to vulnerability that respects your brain's adaptation process, you create the conditions for transformative change not by forcing intimacy, but by gradually retraining your perception of closeness as an opportunity for connection rather than a threat to independence. The vulnerability ladder, climbing toward connection. As we've explored throughout this chapter, retraining your heart to embrace closeness rather than flee from it isn't an overnight transformation. It's a deliberate journey that honors your brain's natural adaptation process while respecting the protective mechanisms that have served you until now. The systematic approach we've outlined recognizes that meaningful change happens incrementally. By taking small, manageable steps toward vulnerability, you're essentially rewriting your emotional operating system, teaching your nervous system that connection can be safe, nurturing, and worth the risk. Remember that this work is profoundly personal and uniquely yours. There will be moments of discomfort as you stretch beyond familiar boundaries, but these moments are precisely where growth flourishes. Each time you choose to share something authentic, to remain present when the urge to withdraw arises, you're actively rewiring neural pathways that have long associated vulnerability with danger. Begin by identifying environments where safety already exists, perhaps with a trusted friend who has consistently shown understanding, a family member who respects boundaries, or a therapist trained to hold space for these explorations. Start small, share a minor concern, express appreciation, or reveal a simple preference you'd typically keep to yourself. After each experience, take time to notice what surfaces within you. Does your chest tighten? Do you feel a surprising lightness? These bodily sensations and emotional responses are valuable data points on your journey. They help calibrate your next steps, telling you whether to remain at this level of vulnerability a while longer or whether you're ready to climb to the next rung. As comfort grows, gradually increase the depth of what you share. Perhaps you'll move from expressing preferences to discussing hopes, from acknowledging surface emotions to revealing deeper feelings. This progressive exposure allows your brain to adapt without becoming overwhelmed by too much too soon. Throughout this process, reflection becomes your compass. Set aside time regularly to consider what felt challenging, what surprised you, and what felt empowering. Ask yourself, what did I learn about myself today? What might I try tomorrow? This reflective practice transforms instinctive responses into conscious choices. Building a support network strengthens your capacity for vulnerability. Surround yourself with people who value authenticity, who respond to openness with kindness rather than judgment. These relationships become safe harbors where you can practice the skills that will eventually extend to other relationships in your life. The beauty of this approach lies in its respect for your innate wisdom and resilience. You've survived by protecting yourself. There's profound intelligence in that. Now you're choosing to expand your emotional repertoire, adding new capacities without diminishing the strength that got you here. Throughout this audiobook, we've traced the origins of avoidant attachment, explored how these patterns manifest in your relationships, examined the beliefs that reinforce distance, and now provided concrete pathways toward greater intimacy. These elements work together as a comprehensive framework for transformation. The journey from avoidance to secure attachment isn't linear. Expect cycles of progress and retreat, moments of breakthrough followed by the comfort of familiar patterns. This natural rhythm isn't failure. It's simply how lasting change occurs. Trust that your brain is remarkably adaptable. The same neuroplasticity that allowed you to develop protective strategies in childhood now enables you to develop new capacities for connection as an adult. With patience and persistence, what once felt threatening can become not just tolerable, but truly nourishing. As you continue on, remember that the goal isn't perfect vulnerability in every situation. Rather, it's developing the flexibility to choose connection when it serves you, to risk openness when the potential rewards outweigh the discomfort. It's building a life where intimacy enhances rather than threatens your sense of self. You've already taken one of the most significant steps by engaging with this material, by choosing to understand rather than simply accept your patterns. That choice alone demonstrates courage and a readiness for growth that will serve you well on this journey. The path toward secure attachment is ultimately a path toward freedom. Freedom to connect without fear, to love without constant vigilance, to be fully yourself while being fully with others. It's a journey worth taking, one vulnerable step at a time. Conclusion. As we reach the end of our journey through this audiobook, I'm struck by the courage you've shown in facing the challenges of avoidant attachment head-on. Acknowledging and working to transform deep-seated patterns is no small feat. You've taken significant steps toward understanding yourself and creating the meaningful connections you deserve. The path we've traveled together has wound through the origins of attachment styles, the neuroscience that shapes our responses to intimacy, and the practical tools that can help rewire these patterns. Your willingness to examine your own story with compassion rather than judgment has been the foundation of this work. The journey towards secure attachment isn't a destination, but an ongoing practice. Some days you'll feel the warm glow of connection and security washing over you. Other days, old patterns may resurface when you least expect them. This ebb and flow is natural and human, not a sign of failure, but an opportunity to practice the skills you've developed. Remember the core lessons we've explored. Your avoidant patterns developed as protection when you needed them most. They served a purpose in your past, helping you survive emotional pain or uncertainty. Acknowledging their protective intent allows you to thank these patterns for their service, while recognizing that you now have more effective tools at your disposal. The exercises throughout this audiobook, from mindfulness practices to boundary-setting techniques to gradual exposure to vulnerability, form your personal toolkit for continued growth. Each time you practice tolerating discomfort with closeness, you're strengthening new neural pathways. Each authentic conversation builds your capacity for intimacy without losing yourself in the process. I want to acknowledge that transformation is rarely linear. You may encounter relationships or situations that trigger old defenses, particularly during times of stress. In these moments, be gentle with yourself. Return to the self-compassion practices we've discussed. Remember that healing happens in spirals, sometimes revisiting familiar territory from a new perspective before moving forward again. Some listeners may find that certain aspects of their attachment patterns remain challenging despite diligent practice. If you find yourself consistently struggling with the same barriers to intimacy, consider working with a therapist who specializes in attachment. They can provide personalized guidance that builds upon the foundation you've established through this audiobook. As you move forward, I encourage you to approach your relationships, both existing and new, with curiosity rather than fear. Notice how different interactions feel in your body. Observe when you're tempted to withdraw and experiment with staying present instead, even if only for a few moments longer than feels comfortable. Each small choice to remain engaged when your instinct is to distance represents genuine progress. Your capacity for connection extends beyond romantic relationships. The principles we've explored apply equally to friendships, family relationships, and even your relationship with yourself. As you practice vulnerability in various contexts, you'll discover which relationships offer the safety needed to thrive and which may require stronger boundaries. I hope the stories shared by others on similar journeys have shown you that you're not alone in this process. Countless individuals have navigated the path from avoidant attachment towards security, each finding their own unique way forward while drawing on universal principles of human connection. The question now is not whether you can change. You've already begun that process by engaging with this audiobook, but rather how you'll continue nurturing your capacity for intimacy while honoring your need for autonomy. The balance between connection and independence is not fixed, but fluid, adjusting to different relationships and life stages. I invite you to return to these chapters whenever you need a reminder or refresher. Note down moments that resonated deeply. Review exercises that proved particularly illuminating. Your relationship with intimacy will evolve as you do, and different aspects of this work may become relevant at different times. What matters most is that you recognize the inherent worthiness of your desire for both connection and autonomy. The path towards secure attachment isn't about becoming someone else. It's about becoming more fully yourself, capable of experiencing the full spectrum of human connection without losing your center. As you finish this audiobook, I hope you feel not only more informed about attachment patterns, but more hopeful about your capacity for transformation. The walls you built for protection can become windows that allow both light and air to flow freely between you and those you choose to let in. This opening is not a weakness, but the truest form of strength. The greatest thing you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return. But to fully receive that love, we must first dismantle the walls we built to protect ourselves from pain. In their place, we can construct bridges, still maintaining our separate shores while allowing for the beautiful journey back and forth between souls.
We appreciate you tuning in to one of our captivating audiobooks. For more immersive experiences, here is another audiobook we're certain you'll enjoy. Don't forget to show your support by liking this video, sharing what you loved about this audiobook in the comments section below, and subscribing for more captivating audiobooks like this. Thanks for being a part of our audiobook community.